I stand in my parents' living room staring at legal documents that just shattered my world. My $8 million tech company built from scratch over 6 grueling years to support my family has just been given away. My mother Karen sits smugly while Father Robert smirks at me with pure satisfaction. You can always make money, but your sister Jessica can't. She needs this more than you do. My hands tremble as I process this betrayal. Jessica won't even meet my eyes. Is that so? I whisper, my voice deadly calm. The weight of those legal papers in my hands feels heavier than all the sleepless nights I spent building my company. As I stare at my parents' faces, memories flood back to how this nightmare began 6 years ago in my cramped garage apartment in Austin, Texas. I was 26 then, fresh out of University of Texas with a computer science degree and dreams bigger than my bank account. While my classmates took comfortable corporate jobs, I chose the entrepreneur's path. My garage became my office, my kitchen table, my conference room, and my laptop. My entire world. Those first months were brutal. I survived on instant ramen and determination, teaching myself advanced programming languages late into the night. My neighbors probably thought I was crazy working 18-hour days in a space most people use for storage. But I had a vision, creating software that would revolutionize how small businesses manage their customer relationships. The breakthrough came during my 4th month. After countless failed prototypes, I finally cracked the code for an intuitive customer relationship management platform. Unlike the expensive, complicated systems dominating the market, mine was simple enough for a corner store owner to use, but powerful enough for a growing manufacturing company. My first client was Maria Rodriguez, who owned a small bakery downtown. She paid me $500 to customize the software for her needs. That payment felt like winning the lottery. Within 6 months, word spread through Austin's tight-knit business community. Small companies were desperate for affordable technology solutions, and I was their answer. But success came with a price. The Internal Revenue Service started asking questions about my rapid growth. My accountant, Harold Chen, suggested bringing in partners to help with tax implications and business structure. That's when I made the decision that would haunt me. I offered my parents 40% ownership. At the time, it seemed logical. Robert worked in insurance understanding business regulations, while Karen had managed finances for a local nonprofit. They seemed thrilled to be involved in their daughter's success. I genuinely believed family meant everything, and sharing my fortune with them felt natural. I remember the day I officially registered them as co-owners. We celebrated at their favorite restaurant, Mama's Kitchen, on South Lamar. Robert raised his glass of sweet tea and declared, "To family businesses and keeping success in the family." Karen beamed with pride, telling everyone we met about her brilliant daughter's company. As my business grew, so did my generosity toward my family. I sent them $3,000 monthly, even when I was still eating cereal for dinner. I paid for their house renovations, turning their modest ranch home into something from Better Homes and Gardens magazine. When Jessica struggled with college tuition at Texas State University, I covered all 4 years without hesitation. Jessica always seemed grateful, but distant. She'd thank me politely for tuition payments, then disappear back to her social life. I assumed she was just focused on her studies, majoring in business administration with dreams of joining my company after graduation. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I scraped together enough money for a decent apartment, I was funding my family's comfortable lifestyle, but I genuinely believed this was what family did for each other. My parents had raised me, supported my education, and encouraged my entrepreneurial dreams. Sharing my success felt like the right thing to do. By year 3, my company employed 15 people and generated over $2 million in annual revenue. I moved into a proper office space in downtown Austin, a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows. My team was small but dedicated, and we'd built something special together. Robert would visit the office occasionally, always asking detailed questions about our financial processes and client contracts. He seemed genuinely interested in learning the business, often taking notes during my explanations. Karen preferred staying in the background, but would beam with pride when introducing me to her friends as my daughter, the successful CEO. Jessica graduated and joined the company as my administrative assistant. She seemed eager to learn, asking thoughtful questions about our software development process and client management strategies. I was thrilled to have family working alongside me, creating the kind of business dynasty I'd always dreamed about. Looking back now, I realize how naive I was. Every gesture of gratitude, every expression of family pride, every enthusiastic question about business operations was part of an elaborate deception. But in those early years, I was too focused on growth and too blinded by love to see the trap being set around me. The company continued expanding. We secured contracts with major Austin businesses, developed new software modules, and built a reputation for innovation and reliability. By year 5, we were generating $6 million annually, and I was being featured in Austin Business Journal as one of the city's rising young entrepreneurs. That's when I discovered the text messages that would change everything. It happened on a Tuesday morning in March. Jessica had left her phone on my desk while she went to get coffee from the break room. A text message notification popped up, and I glanced over automatically. What I saw made my blood freeze. Phase 2 is almost complete. Mom and Dad are ready for the final transfer. E has no idea what's coming. The message was from someone named William, and it was timestamped just minutes earlier. My hands shook as I realized this wasn't some random text. The E clearly referred to me, Evelyn. Phase 2 of what final transfer, of what? I heard Jessica's footsteps returning from the break room, so I quickly looked away from her phone. But my mind was racing. Who was William? What phases were they talking about? What final transfer? When Jessica returned with her coffee, I watched her carefully. She seemed perfectly normal, cheerful, even asking about our afternoon client meeting with Reynolds Manufacturing. But something in her expression felt different now, calculated rather than genuine. That evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I'd built my entire business around trust and transparency, but apparently those principles didn't extend to my own family. The text message kept replaying in my mind, each word feeling more ominous than before. I decided to do something I'd never done before. I checked Jessica's computer activity logs. As the company owner, I had access to all employee computer records, but I'd never used this capability before. It felt like a violation of trust. What I discovered was far worse than any violation I might have committed. Jessica's computer showed months of activity I'd never authorized. She'd been accessing client files, downloading financial reports, and copying proprietary software code. The timestamps showed this activity happening during evenings and weekends when she wasn't supposed to be working. But the most damning evidence was in her email history. I found communications with someone named Marcus Thompson at TechFlow Solutions, our biggest competitor in Austin. Jessica had been sending them detailed information about our client list pricing strategies and upcoming product developments. TechFlow Solutions had been undercutting our bids for months, somehow always knowing exactly what prices to offer potential clients. I'd assumed they were just aggressive competitors, but now I realized they had inside information. My own sister had been feeding our secrets to the enemy. As I scrolled through more emails, the scope of Jessica's betrayal became clear. She wasn't just sharing business information, she was actively helping TechFlow strategize against us. One email discussed neutralizing Evelyn's competitive advantages and accelerating the timeline for market domination. The last email I read that night was the most devastating. It was from Jessica to Marcus Thompson, dated just 2 weeks earlier. The family transfer is almost ready. Once we control her company assets, you'll have everything you need to eliminate her as competition permanently. She trusts us completely and has no idea what's coming." I sat in my office until 3 in the morning trying to process what I'd learned. My sister wasn't just stealing company secrets. She was part of a conspiracy to destroy me entirely. And somehow my parents were involved in this family transfer she'd mentioned. The next morning, I arrived at the office early before Jessica's usual 9 o'clock arrival time. I needed to understand the full scope of what was happening before confronting anyone. Using my administrative access, I dug deeper into company records, looking for any other suspicious activity. What I found was systematic theft spanning almost 8 months. Jessica had been copying client contracts, financial projections, software source code, and strategic planning documents. She'd even accessed employee personal information, including salaries and performance reviews. But the most shocking discovery was in our bank records. Jessica had been granted financial access I'd never authorized, allowing her to view all company accounts and transactions. Someone had forged my signature on authorization forms, giving her broad access to sensitive financial information. When Jessica arrived at the office that morning, she greeted me with her usual cheerful smile. "Good morning, Evelyn, ready for another productive day." She seemed completely relaxed, as if she hadn't been systematically betraying me for months. I forced myself to act normal, but every interaction felt surreal. This person I'd trusted completely, whom I'd helped through college and welcomed into my business, had been methodically destroying everything I'd built, and my parents were somehow involved in the plot. That afternoon, Robert called to invite me for Sunday dinner at their house. "Your mother's making her famous pot roast," he said cheerfully. "We have some important family business to discuss." Important family business. The phrase sent chills down my spine. Based on what I'd discovered, I suspected this dinner would be when they revealed their plan to steal my company. The final transfer Jessica had mentioned was apparently imminent. I agreed to attend dinner, but not as the trusting daughter they expected. I would go as someone who knew exactly what they were planning, someone who was finally ready to fight back. Sunday arrived with the kind of beautiful Texas morning that made Austin feel like paradise. The sun filtered through my apartment windows as I prepared for what I suspected would be the most important dinner of my life. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple blue dress that made me look professional but approachable. If my family was planning to ambush me, I wanted to appear completely unsuspecting. The drive to my parents' house in the Cedar Park suburbs gave me time to strategize. Their ranch-style home sat on a quiet cul-de-sac, surrounded by the mature oak trees and in manicured lawns I'd helped pay for with my business profits. As I pulled into their driveway past the new Cadillac Escalade I'd helped finance, I felt a mix of anger and sadness that surprised me with its intensity. Karen answered the door wearing the kind of warm smile I'd trusted my entire life. "Evelyn, honey, come in, come in. Your father's in the living room and Jessica just arrived." She hugged me tightly, and for a moment I almost questioned what I'd discovered. Could this loving woman really be plotting against her own daughter? The house smelled like pot roast and fresh bread, exactly as it had during countless family dinners throughout my childhood. Family photos lined the hallway walls, documenting years of birthdays, holidays, and achievements. I paused at one picture from my college graduation where Robert had his arm around my shoulders and Karen was beaming with pride. How had we gotten from that moment to this betrayal? Robert stood as I entered the living room, setting aside a thick folder of papers. "There's my successful daughter. How's business treating you these days?" His voice carried that jovial tone I'd always associated with safety and love, but now it sounded calculating. Jessica sat on the couch, looking unusually formal in a black pantsuit I'd never seen before. She avoided direct eye contact, fidgeting with her phone in a way that seemed nervous rather than casual. "Hi, Evelyn. Thanks for coming over." We made small talk during dinner, discussing everything except business. Karen had prepared all my favorite foods: pot roast with carrots and potatoes, green bean casserole, and cornbread that melted in your mouth. Under normal circumstances, this meal would have felt like a warm embrace. Instead, it felt like a last meal before execution. After dinner, Robert suggested we move to the living room for coffee and dessert. That's when he retrieved the folder he'd been holding earlier. "Evelyn, we need to discuss something important about the company." My heart started racing, but I kept my expression neutral. "What about the company?" Karen sat beside Robert on their leather sectional while Jessica took the armchair across from me. The seating arrangement felt deliberately positioned, three of them facing me like a tribunal. Robert opened the folder and pulled out legal documents I recognized as corporate ownership papers. "Your mother and I have been thinking about the future, and we've decided to make some changes to the company structure." What kind of changes?" I asked, though I already suspected what was coming. "Well," Karen interjected, her voice taking on a tone I'd never heard before, "Jessica has been working so hard at the company, learning the business and proving herself. We think she deserves a bigger role." Jessica finally looked at me directly, and what I saw in her eyes was nothing like the sister I thought I knew. There was coldness there, calculation, and something that might have been satisfaction. Robert continued, "We've decided to transfer your shares to Jessica. She'll be taking over as primary owner and CEO." The words hit me like physical blows. Despite knowing this was coming, hearing it spoken aloud felt surreal. "You want to give my company to Jessica?" "It's not really your company, dear," Karen said with false sweetness. "We own 40%, and legally we have the right to make these decisions for the family's benefit." I looked at the documents Robert was holding. They were complex legal papers with official seals and signatures. "These papers say you're transferring 60% ownership to Jessica, not 40%. "That's correct," Robert said, his jovial mask slipping slightly. "We've secured additional shares through various means." "What means?" I demanded. Jessica spoke for the first time since dinner. "We've been working with lawyers and financial advisors for months. There were irregularities in your original business registration, and we've corrected them." My hands were shaking now, but I forced my voice to remain steady. "What irregularities?" Robert leaned forward with the expression of someone explaining something simple to a child. "Evelyn, you're brilliant with technology, but you've never understood business structure. These papers formalize what should have been done from the beginning." I scanned the documents more carefully, recognizing the signatures, but not understanding how they'd obtained my supposed consent for this transfer. "I never signed any of these papers." "You did, actually," Karen said matter-of-factly. "Last month when you signed those insurance documents we asked you to review. Those weren't just insurance papers." The memory came flooding back. Robert had asked me to sign some routine business insurance updates during a family dinner. I'd been tired after a long day and had signed without reading carefully, trusting my father to handle administrative details. "You tricked me into signing ownership transfer documents." "We protected the family's interests," Robert replied. "You were so focused on day-to-day operations, you weren't thinking about long-term security." Jessica stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the backyard where we'd played as children. "Evelyn, you're incredibly talented and you'll always be able to create new businesses. But I need this opportunity. I need the security this company can provide." "You need it." I couldn't keep the anger out of my voice anymore. I built that company from nothing. I worked 18-hour days for 6 years. I sacrificed everything to create something valuable, and you think you need it more than I do. Robert's expression hardened. "Jessica can't just go out and make money the way you can. She needs this company to secure her future. You can always start another business." "She can't make money. She has a business degree and 4 years of experience working at my company." It's not the same, Karen said firmly. You have natural entrepreneurial instincts. Jessica needs more structure and support. I realized that nothing I said would change their minds. This wasn't a family discussion. It was an ambush with predetermined outcomes. So you're just taking my company and giving it to Jessica because you think she needs it more? We're ensuring family resources are distributed fairly, Robert said. You've had your turn at success. Now it's Jessica's turn. Jessica turned from the window and I saw something in her expression that chilled me. Evelyn, you act like you built that company alone, but you had help. You used family money, family connections, and family support. This isn't theft, it's redistribution. Furrow's family money, I funded everything myself. I paid for your college, their house renovations, and monthly support payments. With money you made using our business structure and connections, Karen replied, everything you achieved was built on family foundation. I looked around the room at these three people I'd loved and trusted my entire life. Robert, who taught me to ride a bicycle and drove me to soccer practice. Karen, who helped with homework and celebrated every achievement. Jessica, who'd been my closest friend growing up, sharing secrets and dreams late into the night. But the people sitting in this room weren't those family members anymore. They were strangers, wearing familiar faces, speaking with voices I recognized, but saying words that made no sense. I can't believe you're doing this, I whispered. Robert shrugged. Business is business, Evelyn. You'll understand when you're older. That's when Jessica said the words that shattered my last illusion about family loyalty. Besides, you'll thank us eventually. You were working too hard, getting too stressed. This will force you to find better work-life balance. The casual cruelty of that statement hit me harder than anything else they'd said. She was stealing my life's work and claiming it was for my own good. Robert handed me the legal papers. These documents make everything official. Jessica will take over operations tomorrow morning. I stared at the papers, seeing my signature forged on multiple pages. The legal language was complex, but the outcome was clear. I was being stripped of control over my own company. Is that so? I said quietly, the words coming out much calmer than I felt inside. Yes, Robert said with satisfaction. It's time for Jessica to have her chance at success. I folded the papers carefully and placed them in my purse. I see. Karen seemed surprised by my subdued reaction. We hope you understand this is for the best, dear. I stood up slowly, smoothing my dress and collecting my purse. Thank you for dinner. It was very enlightening. As I walked toward the front door, Jessica called after me. Evelyn, you're not upset, are you? We're still family. I turned back to look at her one last time. This person I'd shared a bedroom with for 16 years, whose college education I'd funded, who'd worked beside me for the past year, learning everything about my business. Still family, I repeated. Absolutely. Robert seemed pleased with my apparent acceptance. I knew you'd be reasonable about this. I drove home in a strange state of calm that surprised me. The shock and anger were still there, but underneath those emotions was something else: determination. They'd expected me to crumble, to accept their theft as inevitable. Instead, they just made the biggest mistake of their lives. That night, I sat in my apartment with a cup of coffee and my laptop thinking about everything I'd learned. My family had stolen my company using forged documents and legal manipulation. Jessica had been selling our business secrets to competitors, and they all seemed to think I'd simply accept this betrayal and walk away quietly. They were about to discover how wrong they were. I spent Monday morning in my downtown Austin office, acting as if nothing had changed while secretly conducting the most important investigation of my life. The building's glass facade reflected the early morning sun as office workers hurried past. On the sidewalk below, everyone focused on their own professional concerns. If only they knew that inside this sleek corporate space, I was uncovering a conspiracy that would make front-page news. My first priority was understanding the full scope of what my family had done legally. I needed to examine every document, every signature, and every financial transaction from the past year. If they'd managed to steal 60% of my company using forged paperwork, there had to be other illegal activities I hadn't discovered yet. Jessica arrived at 15 minutes later than usual, carrying a coffee from the expensive shop down the street, rather than using our office coffee machine. She seemed unusually confident, walking with a different posture than I'd seen before. When she greeted me with, "Good morning, Evelyn," her tone carried subtle authority as if she were already practicing being the boss. "Morning, Jessica. How was the rest of your Sunday?" "Relaxing," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Family dinners are always special, aren't they?" I forced myself to smile back. "They certainly are memorable." She settled at her desk, immediately accessing her computer with the kind of urgency that suggested important tasks were waiting. I watched her carefully, noting how she positioned her screen away from my line of sight and kept checking her phone every few minutes. Around 10:30, I told Jessica I was going to grab coffee and would be back in 20 minutes. Instead, I went to the building's management office on the ground floor and requested copies of all security footage from the past month. As a tenant, I had rights to surveillance records for my office space. Building manager Frank Morrison was helpful and discreet, burning the footage onto digital files I could review privately. "Everything all right, Ms. Evelyn? Nothing stolen from your office, I hope?" "Just being thorough with some internal security procedures," I replied. "Better safe than sorry." Back in my office, I waited until Jessica left for lunch before beginning my review of the security footage. What I discovered made my stomach churn with betrayal and anger that went beyond anything I'd felt the night before. The footage showed Jessica arriving at the office on weekends and evenings when she claimed to be elsewhere. She used her access card to enter the building at times when she should have been at home or out with friends. But more damning was what she did during these unauthorized visits. In one video from 2 weeks ago, Jessica could be seen photographing computer screens displaying our client database. She systematically documented information about every major account, including contract values, renewal dates, and detailed contact information. The footage showed her using a high-resolution camera, not just her phone, suggesting this was a professional operation. Another video from 3 weeks prior showed Jessica meeting with a man I didn't recognize in our conference room after hours. They spread documents across the table and appeared to be discussing our business operations in detail. The man took notes and photographs, while Jessica provided what looked like explanations of our internal processes. But the most shocking footage was from a month ago. It showed Jessica accessing my personal office and photographing documents from my locked filing cabinet. She'd somehow obtained keys to areas she shouldn't have been able to access. The video clearly showed her photographing financial records, strategic planning documents, and confidential client communications. I realized Jessica's betrayal was far more sophisticated than I'd initially understood. This wasn't opportunistic theft. It was systematic corporate espionage conducted over months with professional equipment and careful planning. I decided to examine our company's financial records more thoroughly, looking for irregularities I might have missed. Using my administrative access, I pulled up bank statements, transaction histories, and authorization records for the past year. What I found was horrifying. Starting 6 months ago, there were financial transactions I'd never authorized. Small amounts at first, $100 and $200 transfers that wouldn't normally attract attention. But over time, the amounts grew larger and more frequent. The most significant discovery was a series of loans taken against the company using forged authorization documents. 3 different banks had approved credit lines totaling over $3 million, all bearing my forged signature as primary owner and guarantor. The loan applications were sophisticated forgeries, including false financial statements, fabricated business projections, and counterfeit personal identification documents. Whoever had created these forgeries was either a professional criminal or had access to professional criminal services. I tracked where the loan money had been transferred. The funds went to accounts I'd never seen before, registered under shell companies with names like Texas Business Solutions LLC and Austin Development Partners Inc. These companies existed only on paper, created specifically to hide stolen money. Using online corporate databases, I traced the ownership of these shell companies. The registered agents were people I'd never heard of, but the addresses were familiar. One shell company listed its headquarters as a post office box 3 blocks from my parents' house. Another used an address that belonged to a strip mall near Jessica's apartment. The pattern was clear. My family had been systematically draining money from my company using fraudulent loans and hiding the proceeds in fake companies they controlled. But the financial betrayal went even deeper. I discovered that Robert and Karen had used their 40% ownership to secure additional loans from other sources, leveraging their stake in my successful company to borrow money for personal use. They'd taken out a second mortgage on their house using my company as collateral. They'd secured personal credit lines by claiming partial ownership of a multi-million-dollar business. They'd even used forged documents to apply for business credit cards in my company's name. The total amount they'd stolen or borrowed against my assets was approaching $4 million. And based on the loan terms, I was personally responsible for repaying everything since my signature was on all the authorization documents, even though I'd never signed them. I printed copies of every suspicious transaction and began organizing evidence of the systematic theft. Bank records, loan applications, transfer authorizations, and corporate registration documents painted a picture of sophisticated financial fraud spanning months. Around 3 o'clock, Jessica returned from her extended lunch break, seeming more relaxed than usual. She hummed while organizing papers on her desk, occasionally glancing at me with what looked like satisfaction. "How was lunch?" I asked. "Productive," she replied. "I had a meeting about some exciting new opportunities." "What kind of opportunities?" "Oh, just exploring options for professional growth. You know how important it is to plan for the future?" I wondered if her productive lunch had involved coordinating with whoever was helping orchestrate this theft. The sophistication of the financial fraud suggested multiple people with specialized skills, lawyers who could forge documents, bankers willing to approve suspicious loans, and financial experts who understood how to create untraceable shell companies. That afternoon, I decided to examine my company's vendor relationships and professional services. If my family had been planning this theft for months, they would have needed help from lawyers, accountants, and possibly private investigators. I started with our legal bills. My company had always used Peterson Hayes and Associates for routine legal work like contract reviews and corporate filings, but I discovered additional legal bills from the same firm for services I'd never requested. According to the billing records, Peterson Hayes and Associates had provided ownership restructuring consultation, corporate governance advisory services, and asset transfer documentation over the past 6 months. These services totaled over $40,000 in fees I'd never authorized. The lead attorney on these mysterious services was William Hayes, senior partner at the firm. I'd never met William Hayes personally, but apparently he'd been working extensively on behalf of my company without my knowledge. I called Peterson Hayes and Associates and asked to speak with William Hayes about my company's account. His secretary said he was in meetings all afternoon but could see me first thing Tuesday morning. "Please tell Mr. Hayes that Evelyn Morrison needs to discuss some urgent questions about recent legal work performed for my company." "Of course, Ms. Morrison. Mr. Hayes has been expecting your call." Expecting my call. That confirmed my suspicion that William Hayes was part of the conspiracy. He knew I would eventually discover the unauthorized legal work and was prepared for my questions. I spent the rest of Monday afternoon documenting everything I discovered: the security footage of Jessica's unauthorized access, the financial records showing systematic theft, the loan documents with forged signatures, and the evidence of unauthorized legal work. By the time I left the office that evening, I had assembled a comprehensive picture of what my family had done. This wasn't just taking my company. They'd committed multiple felonies, including forgery, fraud, corporate espionage, and identity theft. But I still didn't understand the full scope of their plan. If they'd stolen $4 million over 6 months, why did they also need to take ownership of my company? What was their endgame? That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with questions and anger. My family hadn't just betrayed me, they'd committed serious crimes that could send them to prison for years. And somehow, they seemed confident they'd get away with everything. Tomorrow's meeting with William Hayes would provide answers, but I suspected those answers would reveal betrayals even worse than what I'd already discovered. Tuesday morning arrived gray and overcast, matching my mood as I drove toward the downtown Austin offices of Peterson Hayes and Associates. Their building was one of those imposing glass and steel structures that screamed expensive legal services, the kind of place where wealthy clients paid premium prices for sophisticated solutions to complex problems. William Hayes had agreed to see me at 8:30 before normal business hours, which seemed unusual for a senior partner at a prestigious firm. As I rode the elevator to the 15th floor, I wondered what explanation he would offer for the unauthorized legal work performed on my company's behalf. The law firm's reception area was decorated with dark wood panels, leather furniture, and oil paintings of distinguished-looking men in judicial robes. Everything about the space was designed to convey authority, tradition, and success. The receptionist, a professionally dressed woman in her 40s, greeted me with the kind of practiced smile reserved for important clients. "Ms. Morrison, Mr. Hayes is expecting you. Right this way, please." William Hayes was a man in his mid-60s with silver hair, an expensive suit, and the kind of confident bearing that comes from decades of wielding legal power. His office overlooked downtown Austin with floor-to-ceiling windows, providing views of the state capitol building in the distance. "Ms. Morrison, thank you for coming in. Please have a seat." He gestured toward a leather chair across from his massive mahogany desk. "I understand you have questions about some recent legal work." I settled into the chair, noting how he positioned himself behind his desk like a fortress. "Mr. Hayes, my company has been billed for over $40,000 in legal services I never requested. I need to understand what work was performed and who authorized it." He opened a thick file folder and began reviewing documents. The work was extensive and quite complex, involving corporate restructuring and ownership transfers. The authorization came through proper channels. "What channels? I'm the primary owner and CEO, and I never authorized any ownership transfers." William Hayes looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Ms. Morrison, perhaps we should discuss this more frankly. Your family has been planning these changes for quite some time. They've been very thorough in their preparations." "Planning what changes?" "The transfer of corporate control to more suitable management. Your sister Jessica has demonstrated much better judgment regarding the company's future direction." I felt my anger rising, but forced myself to remain calm. Better judgment about what? He pulled out several documents and placed them on the desk where I could see them. "These are psychiatric evaluations documenting your history of anxiety, depression, and poor decision-making under stress. They indicate you're not psychologically fit to continue leading a multi-million-dollar enterprise." I stared at the papers in shock. They appeared to be official medical documents bearing the letterhead of Austin Mental Health Associates. The reports described sessions with a psychiatrist I'd never met, detailing supposed conversations about my inability to handle business pressure and my erratic emotional state. "I've never seen a psychiatrist. These documents are completely fabricated." The records are quite detailed, Ms. Morrison. Dr. Franklin Reed has been treating you for severe anxiety and stress-related disorders for over a year. His professional opinion is that continued business leadership would be detrimental to your mental health. Dr. Franklin Reed. I've never heard of him in my life. William Hayes leaned back in his chair with the expression of someone dealing with an irrational person. Ms. Morrison, your family is concerned about your well-being. These psychiatric evaluations support their decision to remove you from positions of responsibility for your own protection. I realized this was more than simple theft. They'd created an elaborate psychological profile to justify taking my company by claiming I was mentally unstable. Anyone who challenged their actions could be told that professional medical opinions supported their decisions. Mr. Hayes, these psychiatric reports are completely fraudulent. I've never been treated for anxiety or depression, and I've certainly never met this Dr. Reed. The documentation is quite comprehensive, he replied smoothly. Dr. Reed has detailed notes from numerous therapy sessions, including direct quotes from your conversations about feeling overwhelmed by business responsibilities. He showed me pages of supposed therapy notes describing sessions that had never happened. The handwriting looked authentic, the medical terminology was accurate, and the letterhead appeared legitimate. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to create believable false medical records. This is medical fraud, I said firmly. Creating false psychiatric records is a serious crime. Ms. Morrison, your agitated response demonstrates exactly the kind of emotional instability Dr. Reed documented in his reports. Your family's concerns appear to be well-founded. I realized that anything I said could be twisted to support their false narrative about my mental state. If I showed anger, they'd claim it proved my instability. If I remained calm, they'd say it showed emotional disconnection from reality. Who created these false medical records? The records are legitimate documentation from a licensed psychiatrist. Dr. Reed maintains detailed files on all his patients. I pulled out my phone and called information asking for the number of Austin Mental Health Associates. The operator searched for several minutes before reporting that no such practice existed in Austin or the surrounding area. Mr. Hayes' Austin Mental Health Associates doesn't exist. There's no listing for this practice anywhere. He frowned and checked his own records. That's odd. The address on file is on West 6th Street. I knew West 6th Street well, having lived in Austin for years. The address listed on the fake letterhead was a coffee shop called Urban Grind, not a psychiatric practice. The address you have is a coffee shop. Dr. Franklin Reed and Austin Mental Health Associates are completely fictitious. William Hayes appeared genuinely surprised, which made me suspect he might not have known the psychiatric reports were fake. Ms. Morrison, if these records are fraudulent, that creates significant legal problems for everyone involved. Who provided these psychiatric reports to your firm? He checked his files again. They were submitted by your father, Robert Morrison, along with the ownership transfer requests. He claimed they were necessary documentation to support the family's decision. My father provided fraudulent psychiatric records to justify stealing my company. If the records are fake, then yes, that would constitute fraud. For the first time since I'd entered his office, William Hayes looked uncomfortable. Ms. Morrison, I need to ask you some direct questions. Have you ever been treated for mental health issues? No, never. I've never seen a psychiatrist, psychologist, or any mental health professional. Have you ever discussed feeling overwhelmed by business responsibilities with family members? Of course, I've mentioned work stress during family conversations. Every business owner experiences stress, but I've never expressed inability to manage my responsibilities. William Hayes was quiet for several minutes, reviewing the documents more carefully. Ms. Morrison, if these psychiatric evaluations are fabricated, your father has involved my firm in serious criminal activity without our knowledge. What exactly did my father tell you when he requested your services? He pulled out correspondence files. Robert Morrison contacted our firm 6 months ago, claiming you were experiencing severe mental health problems that were affecting your business judgment. He provided these psychiatric reports and requested our assistance with protective ownership transfers. Protective transfers. Legal mechanisms to remove control from someone who's become psychologically incapable of managing business affairs. It's similar to guardianship proceedings, but specifically designed for corporate situations. I realized my family's plan was even more sophisticated than I'd suspected. They'd convinced a prestigious law firm to help them steal my company by claiming it was necessary for my mental health protection. Mr. Hayes, I need copies of all documentation in your files related to my case. That's complicated. Attorney-client privilege protects these records. Who is your client? Me or my father? He paused, clearly recognizing the legal problem. Your father initiated the relationship, but the work involved your company, so technically, this is quite complex. If my father used fraudulent documents to obtain your services, wouldn't that void any attorney-client relationship? William Hayes was now looking distinctly uncomfortable. Ms. Morrison, you're asking questions that require careful legal analysis. If fraud was involved in establishing our engagement, that changes everything. I want copies of every document in your files, every bill submitted to my company, and every communication with my family members. I'll need to consult with other partners before releasing anything. This situation has become much more complex than it initially appeared. I stood to leave, realizing I wasn't going to get immediate answers from William Hayes, but I'd learned something crucial. The conspiracy involved fraudulent psychiatric reports designed to make me appear mentally unstable. Mr. Hayes, I expect full disclosure of your firm's involvement in this matter. If you've been deceived by my family, cooperation with me is your best protection. As I left his office, I realized the scope of what my family had planned was staggering. They'd created fake medical records, involved prestigious lawyers, and developed legal justifications for stealing my company. This wasn't amateur opportunism, it was sophisticated criminal enterprise. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed I would accept their theft quietly and never fight back. That afternoon, I would discover that their conspiracy extended far beyond fraudulent psychiatric reports and stolen ownership papers. I returned to my office that Tuesday afternoon, feeling like I was walking through a minefield where every step could trigger another explosion of betrayal. The revelation about the fraudulent psychiatric records had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. Creating fake medical documents wasn't just theft. It was character assassination designed to destroy my credibility permanently. Jessica was at her desk when I arrived, typing furiously on her computer with an intensity I'd rarely seen before. She glanced up as I passed, offering a smile that now looked sinister rather than sisterly. "How was your morning meeting?" she asked casually. "Enlightening," I replied, wondering how much she knew about the fake psychiatric reports. "That's good. Learning new things keeps life interesting." The casual way she spoke made my skin crawl. Was she deliberately being cryptic, or was I reading malicious intent into innocent conversation? After everything I'd discovered, I couldn't trust my instincts about anyone in my family anymore. I closed my office door and immediately called my personal attorney, Patricia Moore, whom I'd used for apartment leases and minor legal issues over the years. Patricia had always been reliable and straightforward, someone I could trust for honest advice about this nightmare situation. "Patricia Moore's office, this is Angela speaking." "Angela, this is Evelyn Morrison. I need to schedule an urgent meeting with Patricia today if possible. I'm dealing with a serious legal situation involving my business." There was a pause that seemed longer than necessary. "Ms. Morrison, I'm sorry, but Ms. Moore cannot represent you in any matter involving your family or your business." "I don't understand. Why not?" "Ms. Moore has a conflict of interest that prevents her from taking your case." What kind of conflict of interest? I've been her client for 3 years. I'm not authorized to provide details, but she cannot assist you with any legal matters related to Morrison Tech Solutions or your family members. The phone call ended with a click that echoed in my ears like a gunshot. Patricia Moore had been representing me long before my family's conspiracy began, so how could she suddenly have a conflict of interest? I spent the next hour calling every attorney I could find in Austin who specialized in corporate law and fraud cases. The conversations followed a disturbing pattern. Henderson and Associates cannot take your case due to existing client relationships. Morrison versus Morrison would create ethical complications we cannot navigate. We've already been contacted about potential involvement in this matter and must decline representation. By late afternoon, I'd contacted 12 law firms and received 12 rejections. The consistency was too remarkable to be coincidental. Someone had systematically contacted Austin's legal community and created conflicts that prevented me from obtaining representation. Finally, I reached Michael Torres at Torres Legal Services, a smaller firm that specialized in criminal defense and fraud cases. His office was in a converted house near the university, far from the downtown legal establishment my family had apparently compromised. Mr. Torres, I'm facing a complex fraud situation involving my family and my business. I've been unable to find representation due to supposed conflicts of interest. How many firms have you contacted? He asked. 12, and they've all declined for similar reasons. That's not coincidental, Ms. Morrison. Someone has been working very hard to isolate you legally. Can you come in tomorrow morning at 9? This situation sounds like it requires immediate attention. Relief flooded through me. Finally, someone willing to help rather than turning me away with vague explanations about conflicts. That evening, I decided to research Dr. Franklin Reed, the fictitious psychiatrist whose fake reports were being used to justify my family's actions. If I could prove his credentials were fabricated, it would undermine their entire legal strategy. Using online databases for medical professionals, I searched for any Dr. Franklin Reed licensed to practice psychiatry in Texas. The search returned no results. I expanded to surrounding states and then nationwide, but found no psychiatrist named Franklin Reed who could have created the reports William Hayes had shown me. Next, I researched Austin Mental Health Associates, the supposed practice where these fictional therapy sessions had occurred. Property records showed the West 6th Street address belonged to Urban Grind Coffee Shop, which had occupied that location for over 5 years. There was no indication any psychiatric practice had ever operated from that address. I decided to visit the address in person to document what I found there. The coffee shop was busy with the usual evening crowd of students and young professionals. I ordered a latte and approached the manager, a friendly woman in her 30s named Claire. "Excuse me, I'm trying to locate a psychiatric practice that used to operate at this address. Austin Mental Health Associates." Claire looked confused. "I've been managing this location for 3 years, and it's been Urban Grind the whole time. Before that, it was another coffee shop called Bean there. I don't think there's ever been a medical office here." "What about the building next door?" "That's been a vintage clothing store for as long as I can remember. You might want to check with the property management company, but I'm pretty sure this whole block is zoned for retail, not medical practices." I thanked Claire and spent 20 minutes photographing the coffee shop, the neighboring businesses, and the street numbers to document that no psychiatric practice existed at the address listed on the fraudulent medical reports. Driving home, I realized the sophistication of my family's conspiracy was beyond anything I'd initially imagined. They'd created an entirely fictional medical practice complete with authentic-looking letterhead, detailed therapy notes, and professional psychiatric evaluations. The level of preparation and attention to detail suggested months of planning and possibly professional criminal assistance. But their elaborate scheme had a fatal flaw. They'd assumed I would never investigate thoroughly enough to uncover the deception. They'd expected me to accept the legal papers, psychiatric reports, and attorney explanations without question. Back in my apartment, I created a detailed timeline of everything I had discovered: the fraudulent psychiatric reports, the compromised legal representation, the systematic isolation from professional help, and the fake medical practice all pointed to a conspiracy that extended far beyond my immediate family. Someone with extensive knowledge of legal procedures, medical documentation, and fraud techniques was helping them. This wasn't something Robert and Karen could have planned alone. They had professional assistance from people who specialize in sophisticated, white-collar crime. Around 10 o'clock that night, my phone rang. The caller ID showed my parents' home number. "Evelyn, honey, it's your father. Your mother and I are concerned about you." "Concerned about what?" "We heard you've been making some unusual phone calls today, contacting lawyers and asking strange questions. We're worried you might be having some kind of breakdown." The timing of his call was too perfect to be coincidental. Someone had been monitoring my activities and reported my attempts to find legal representation. "I'm not having a breakdown, Robert. I'm investigating the fraud you've committed against my company." "Fraud, Evelyn. This kind of paranoid thinking is exactly what Dr. Reed warned us about. You're imagining conspiracies where none exist." "Dr. Reed doesn't exist," I checked. Austin Mental Health Associates is a coffee shop, not a psychiatric practice. There was a long pause before Robert responded. "Evelyn, you're clearly more confused than we realized. Dr. Reed is a respected psychiatrist who's been treating you for over a year." "I've never met any Dr. Reed, and I've never been treated for mental health problems." "The fact that you don't remember your therapy sessions is concerning. Dr. Reed mentioned you might experience memory problems related to your anxiety disorder." I realized they were creating real-time false narratives to explain away any evidence I discovered. If I proved Dr. Reed was fictional, they'd claim my mental illness was causing memory loss about my psychiatric treatment. "Robert, I'm going to prove everything you've done is fraudulent. The forged signatures, the fake medical records, the stolen money, all of it." "Evelyn, we love you, and we're going to get you the help you need. Your behavior tonight proves you're not well enough to manage business responsibilities." The phone call ended, but its implications were chilling. They were documenting my erratic behavior for future legal use. Every conversation, every question I asked, every attempt to defend myself would be twisted into evidence of mental instability. I realized they'd created a perfect trap. If I fought back, they'd claim it proved my psychological problems. If I accepted their theft quietly, they'd get everything they wanted. Either way, I lost. But they'd underestimated one crucial factor. I wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. Tomorrow's meeting with Michael Torres would be the beginning of my counterattack, and I had evidence they didn't know I'd collected. The fake psychiatric reports, the non-existent medical practice, the systematic legal isolation, and the real-time manipulation of my behavior would all become weapons in my hands rather than theirs. They wanted to play sophisticated legal games. I was about to show them what happened when their target refused to be a victim. Wednesday morning brought thunderstorms to Austin, with dark clouds rolling in from the west as I drove toward Michael Torres' office near the University of Texas campus. The weather seemed appropriate for what I suspected would be another day of devastating revelations about my family's betrayal. Michael Torres' office occupied the bottom floor of a converted Victorian house painted cheerful yellow with white trim. Unlike the intimidating corporate law firms I'd contacted yesterday, this place felt approachable and genuine. The waiting room had comfortable mismatched furniture, local art on the walls, and the kind of warm atmosphere that suggested real people worked here. Michael Torres was a man in his early 50s with graying temples, kind eyes, and the slightly rumpled appearance of someone who cared more about justice than image. He greeted me with a firm handshake and led me to his office, which was lined floor to ceiling with legal books and case files. Ms. Morrison, thank you for coming in. I've been thinking about your situation since yesterday's call, and I have some preliminary thoughts about what might be happening. I settled into a chair across from his desk, noting how different this felt from my meeting with William Hayes. Michael Torres faced me directly, rather than hiding behind his desk, and his expression conveyed genuine concern rather than calculated authority. Before we discuss strategy, I said, I need to know you haven't been contacted by my family or their representatives. I checked our records thoroughly. No one named Morrison has ever contacted this firm, and we have no conflicts that would prevent me from representing you. Relief washed over me. Finally, someone who could provide independent legal advice without hidden agendas or mysterious conflicts of interest. I spent the next hour detailing everything I discovered: the forged ownership documents, the fraudulent psychiatric reports, the non-existent medical practice, the systematic theft of company funds, and the elaborate legal trap my family had constructed. Michael Torres took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated his understanding of complex fraud schemes. When I finished my account, he leaned back in his chair with an expression of professional disgust. Ms. Morrison, what you're describing is one of the most sophisticated family fraud conspiracies I've encountered in 20 years of practice. The coordination between multiple professionals, the creation of false documentation, and the systematic isolation tactics suggest extensive criminal experience. What in criminal experience? This isn't their first time. The level of sophistication indicates they've done this before, probably multiple times. Creating convincing fake medical records requires specialized knowledge and criminal contacts. So what can we do? First, we need to document everything you've discovered and gather additional evidence. Second, we need to understand the full scope of their conspiracy before they realize you're fighting back. Michael Torres outlined a strategy that began with forensic financial analysis, continued with investigation of the fake medical records, and concluded with potential criminal charges against everyone involved in the fraud. The key is moving fast, he explained. Once they realize you're not accepting their theft quietly, they'll accelerate their timeline and possibly destroy evidence. I left his office feeling hopeful for the first time in days. Having competent legal representation changed everything. I wasn't facing this nightmare alone anymore. But my optimism was about to be shattered in a way I never could have anticipated. I arrived home Wednesday evening to find my fiancé, Thomas Bradley, waiting in our apartment with a bottle of wine and what appeared to be a romantic dinner he'd prepared. Candles flickered on the dining table and soft music played from the stereo system. Thomas and I had been together for almost 2 years, living together for the past 8 months in my downtown apartment. He was an investment advisor with a successful practice, someone I'd met through mutual friends and gradually fallen in love with. Throughout the chaos of discovering my family's betrayal, Thomas had been my emotional anchor, the one person I could trust completely. "This is a wonderful surprise," I said, kissing him hello. "I've had such a terrible few days, and this is exactly what I needed." Thomas smiled and pulled out my chair at the dinner table. "I thought you could use some relaxation and normal conversation after everything that's been happening with your family." As we ate, I found myself sharing details about my investigation that I hadn't planned to discuss. Thomas was an excellent listener, asking thoughtful questions and offering supportive comments that encouraged me to explain more than I probably should have. "So you've hired Michael Torres to represent you?" he asked. "Yes, finally, someone without conflicts of interest. He thinks we can prove fraud and possibly bring criminal charges." "What kind of evidence do you have so far?" I explained about the fake psychiatric reports, the forged financial documents, and the systematic theft of company funds. Thomas listened carefully, occasionally, taking notes on a small pad he claimed was for remembering details of my stressful situation. "Have you told Michael Torres about all the evidence you've collected?" Not everything yet. Tomorrow, I'm bringing him copies of the security footage showing Jessica's unauthorized access and the financial records documenting the stolen money. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. That sounds like a solid foundation for legal action. After dinner, we moved to the couch to watch a movie, but I found myself continuing to discuss the investigation. Thomas seemed genuinely interested in helping me work through the complex legal and emotional challenges I was facing. "What's your biggest concern right now?" he asked. "That they'll destroy evidence before we can stop them. Michael Torres wants to move fast, but I'm worried they're already covering their tracks." "What about the backup copies of your financial records? Do you have everything stored securely?" I explained about the electronic copies I'd saved to a secure online storage service accessible only through my personal computer with multiple layers of password protection. "That's smart," Thomas said. "You can't be too careful with important evidence." Around 11 o'clock, Thomas's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it quickly, then set the phone face down on the coffee table. "Everything all right?" I asked. "Just work stuff, nothing urgent." But something about his reaction seemed off. Thomas usually checked work messages thoroughly and often shared amusing client stories with me. The brief, secretive way he'd handled this message felt different. When Thomas went to the bathroom, curiosity got the better of me. I quickly picked up his phone, expecting to see a harmless work-related text that he'd dismissed too quickly. What I saw made my blood freeze. "Phase 3 complete. She told me everything. Execute final transfer tomorrow. J." The message was from someone identified in Thomas's contacts as Jessica M. My sister had sent my fiancé a text message about completing Phase 3 and executing a final transfer based on information I had provided. My hands were shaking as I heard Thomas returning from the bathroom. I quickly set his phone back where I'd found it and tried to compose my expression, but my mind was racing with horrible implications. Thomas sat back down beside me as if nothing had happened. "Ready to finish the movie?" "Actually, I'm feeling pretty tired. Maybe we should call it a night." "Of course, honey. You've been under tremendous stress lately." As we prepared for bed, I watched Thomas carefully looking for any signs that he was deceiving me. But he seemed completely normal, affectionate, and caring as always. If I hadn't seen that text message, I never would have suspected anything was wrong. I lay awake most of that night staring at the ceiling and trying to process what the text message meant. Phase 3 complete. She told me everything. What was Phase 3? How long had Thomas been communicating with Jessica? What information had I unknowingly provided that they needed? The text suggested Thomas had been deliberately gathering information about my investigation and reporting it to Jessica. Every detail I'd shared about my legal strategy, my evidence, and my plans had apparently been transmitted to the people trying to destroy me. But the relationship felt so real. Thomas's affection, our intimate conversations, our plans for the future, had all of that been an act? Was it possible to fake 2 years of love and companionship just to gather information? Thursday morning, Thomas left early for what he claimed was a client breakfast meeting. After he was gone, I conducted the most painful investigation of my life, searching our shared apartment for evidence of his deception. In his home office, I found a laptop I'd never seen before hidden in a filing cabinet drawer. When I opened it, the desktop contained folders labeled with my name, my company's name, and my family members' names. The folders contained detailed reports documenting every conversation we'd had about my business, my family relationships, my financial situation, and my personal history. Thomas had been systematically recording information about my entire life for over a year. But the most devastating discovery was a series of audio files labeled with dates going back 18 months. I clicked on the most recent file and heard my own voice from the night before, explaining my legal strategy and evidence to someone I trusted completely. Thomas had been recording our intimate conversations. Every time I'd shared fears, hopes, secrets, or plans, he'd been documenting everything for later use against me. I found contracts showing Thomas was actually employed by Morrison Consulting Services, a private investigation firm I'd never heard of. His supposed investment advisory business was a cover story. His real job was infiltrating my personal life and gathering intelligence about my business operations. The contracts were signed by Robert Morrison. My own father had hired a private investigator to pose as my boyfriend and spy on me for almost 2 years. Our entire relationship had been a professional deception. Every kiss, every conversation, every moment of intimacy had been part of an elaborate fraud designed to gather information that could be used to destroy me. I sat in Thomas's office chair, surrounded by evidence of the most personal betrayal imaginable, and realized my family's conspiracy was even more monstrous than I'd understood. They hadn't just stolen my money and my company, they'd stolen 2 years of my emotional life by hiring someone to fake loving me. The text message from Jessica suddenly made complete sense. Phase 3 had been gathering intelligence about my legal strategy and evidence. Now they could prepare countermeasures because Thomas had provided them with everything they needed to know about my investigation. But they'd made one critical error. They'd assumed Thomas could continue gathering intelligence without me discovering the truth. Instead, I now knew exactly how they were staying one step ahead of my legal efforts, and I could use that knowledge against them. The fake relationship was about to become the weapon that destroyed their entire conspiracy. I spent Thursday morning in a state of emotional numbness that felt worse than rage or sadness, discovering that my 2-year relationship with Thomas was an elaborate fraud designed to spy on me had shattered something fundamental about my ability to trust my own judgment. If I could be so completely deceived by someone I'd shared my bed with for 8 months, how could I trust anyone? But I couldn't afford the luxury of emotional processing. Thomas would return from his fake client meeting expecting to find his trusting girlfriend, not someone who discovered his true identity. I needed to act normal while secretly preparing for whatever came next. Around noon, I decided to test my financial situation. I'd been so focused on investigating the fraud that I hadn't checked my personal bank accounts since discovering the conspiracy. When I logged into my primary checking account online, the screen displayed a message that made my heart stop. Account temporarily frozen pending investigation. I called First National Bank immediately, hoping for a reasonable explanation. Ms. Morrison, your account has been frozen due to suspicious activity reported by law enforcement. You'll need to speak with our fraud department. What kind of suspicious activity? I'm not authorized to provide details, but someone filed a report claiming fraudulent transactions on your account. The freeze will remain in place pending investigation. I checked my other accounts and found the same situation everywhere. My savings account, business checking account, credit cards, and even my retirement investments had all been frozen due to fraud investigation. Without access to money, I couldn't pay my attorney, hire investigators, or even buy groceries. Someone had systematically cut off all my financial resources. Next, I tried to access my company's office building. When I arrived downtown and attempted to use my keycard, the electronic reader flashed red and denied entry. I tried the backup code I'd programmed for emergencies, but that didn't work either. James Miller, the security guard I'd hired personally 3 years ago, approached me in the lobby with an uncomfortable expression. Ms. Morrison, I'm sorry, but I can't let you into the building without proper authorization from management. James, I am management. This is my company. I understand the confusion, ma'am, but according to our updated records, you're no longer authorized for building access. Ms. Jessica Morrison is listed as the primary contact and decision maker. I stared at James in disbelief. This was a man whose daughter I'd helped get into college, whose family I'd supported during his wife's medical emergency. Now he was treating me like a stranger, trying to break into my own building. James, you know me. You've worked for my company for 3 years. Yes, ma'am, and I'm sorry about this situation, but I have to follow company policies or I'll lose my job. Behind James, I could see my former employees working at their desks, visible through the glass walls of what used to be my office. My company was operating normally, except I was locked out of everything I'd built. I called my business attorney, hoping Michael Torres could help me regain access to my own company. Michael Torres's office. This is Evelyn Morrison. I need to speak with Michael Torres immediately about an emergency situation. I'm sorry, but Mr. Torres is no longer representing you. What do you mean he's no longer representing me? Mr. Torres received information that created a conflict of interest. He cannot continue as your attorney. The pattern was repeating itself. Yesterday, Michael Torres had been eager to help me fight the fraud. Today, he was suddenly unavailable due to mysterious conflicts. I drove to his office anyway, hoping to get a face-to-face explanation for this sudden change. Ms. Morrison, I'm sorry you had to come down here, Michael Torres said when I insisted on seeing him. I received some information yesterday that changes everything. What information? Your family provided documentation showing you've been embezzling funds from your own company for over a year. There are bank records, forged invoices, and evidence of systematic theft. That's completely false. The documentation is quite detailed. Apparently, the FBI is already investigating your activities. I cannot represent someone under federal criminal investigation for the same crimes we discussed pursuing against your family. I realized what had happened. Thomas had reported my entire legal strategy to Jessica, allowing my family to create false evidence that made me appear to be the criminal. Now, my own attorney believed I was guilty of the fraud I was trying to expose. Michael, the evidence is fabricated. My family is framing me. Ms. Morrison, I understand you're upset, but the federal investigation appears to be quite serious. I recommend you find a criminal defense attorney immediately. I left his office feeling completely isolated. My family had systematically destroyed my access to money, my company, and legal representation. Every professional relationship I'd counted on had been corrupted or eliminated. That afternoon, I returned to my apartment to find Thomas waiting with a concerned expression and a bottle of my favorite wine. Honey, I heard you had some problems today with bank accounts and building access. I'm so sorry you're going through this. I studied his face carefully, looking for any sign that he knew why I was having these problems. But Thomas appeared genuinely sympathetic and concerned. How did you hear about my problems? I asked. Your sister Jessica called me this afternoon. She's worried about you and thought I should know what's happening. The casual way he mentioned talking to Jessica made my skin crawl. Of course, they'd been in direct contact. He was working for my family. What exactly did Jessica tell you? That there might be some kind of federal investigation into your business practices. She's concerned that the stress might be affecting your judgment. I realized Thomas was delivering prepared talking points designed to make me doubt my own perceptions. If I became confused about what was real, I'd be less likely to continue fighting back. Thomas, do you think I'm capable of embezzling money from my own company? Of course not, sweetheart. You're the most honest person I know. But sometimes financial records can be misinterpreted, especially during stressful periods. His answer was perfectly calculated to sound supportive while planting seeds of doubt about my innocence. That evening, I received a phone call from my apartment's property management company. Ms. Morrison, this is Janet from Austin Property Management. I need to inform you that your lease has been terminated due to unpaid rent and violation of tenant agreements. My rent is automatically debited from my bank account every month. How can it be unpaid? According to our records, your account has been frozen, so the automatic payment was declined. Additionally, we've received reports of disruptive behavior and property damage that violate your lease terms. I've never damaged any property or engaged in disruptive behavior. We have documentation of multiple noise complaints and evidence of the apartment damage. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises. I realized they'd not only frozen my bank accounts, but also fabricated complaints to force me out of my home. Within days, I would be homeless with no money, no job, and no legal representation. The systematic destruction of my life was almost complete, but there was one more devastating blow waiting. That evening, I received a call from Austin Police Department. Ms. Morrison, this is Detective Sarah Williams. We need to speak with you about some serious allegations involving your business. What kind of allegations? We've received reports of computer hacking, corporate espionage, and theft of intellectual property. Can you come to the station tomorrow morning for questioning? I realized my family had accused me of the exact crimes they'd been committing. The security footage showing Jessica's unauthorized access to company computers had probably been presented as evidence that I was hacking my own systems. Detective Williams, I'm the victim of fraud, not the perpetrator. Ma'am, that's what we need to discuss. There are multiple complaints against you from family members and business associates. We need to hear your side of the story. After hanging up, I sat in my apartment, which I'd have to leave in 72 hours, surrounded by the wreckage of my life. In less than a week, I'd lost my company, my money, my home, my attorney, and my relationship. Now I was facing criminal charges for crimes committed against me. Thomas appeared in the doorway with 2 glasses of wine. Everything all right? You look upset. I looked at this man who'd shared my bed for 8 months while secretly recording our conversations and reporting my activities to my family. The person I'd planned to marry was actually a paid spy hired by my father to destroy me. Everything's fine, I said, accepting the wine he offered. Just tired. But as I sipped the wine and listened to Thomas's fake expressions of concern, I realized my family had made one crucial error in their perfect plan. They'd assumed their total victory would make me surrender quietly. Instead, it was about to make me dangerous. Friday morning brought unexpected salvation in the form of a phone call that would change everything. As I sat in my soon-to-be former apartment trying to figure out how to fight back with no money, no legal help, and no access to my own company, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Ms. Morrison, this is Marcus Thompson from TechFlow Solutions. I know this might seem unusual, but I need to speak with you urgently about your sister Jessica. Marcus Thompson was the CEO of my biggest competitor, the company that had been undercutting our bids for months using inside information Jessica had been providing. This was literally the last person I'd expected to offer help. I'm not sure we have anything to discuss, Mr. Thompson. Actually, we have everything to discuss. Can you meet me for coffee in 1 hour? Grind Coffee on South Lamar, the place with the outdoor patio. Something in his voice convinced me this wasn't a trap, though. After everything I'd experienced, I wasn't sure I could trust my judgment about anything anymore. An hour later, I sat across from Marcus Thompson at a small table on the outdoor patio of Grind Coffee. Marcus was a man in his early 40s with an honest face and the kind of straightforward manner that seemed genuine rather than calculated. Ms. Morrison, before we talk, I need you to know that what Jessica has been doing is not corporate espionage in the traditional sense. It's something much worse. What do you mean? 3 months ago, Jessica approached TechFlow claiming to have insider information about Morrison Tech Solutions that she wanted to sell. At first, I thought this was standard competitive intelligence, possibly even information you'd authorized her to share. I leaned forward, intrigued despite my suspicion. But when Jessica started providing detailed technical specifications and client lists, I became concerned. The information was too sensitive for any legitimate business purpose. So I started recording our meetings. Marcus pulled out a small digital recorder and placed it on the table. Everything Jessica told me is documented on this device. What you'll hear proves she's been systematically stealing your intellectual property for months. Why are you telling me this? Because Jessica made a mistake during our last meeting. She told me about plans to frame you for embezzlement and force you out of your own company. That's not competitive intelligence. That's criminal conspiracy. Marcus pressed play on the recorder, and I heard Jessica's voice clearly discussing the elaborate plan to steal my company using forged documents and false accusations. Evelyn has no idea what's coming, Jessica's recorded voice said. By next week, she'll be facing criminal charges while I control everything she's built. Marcus, you'll be able to acquire her client list and technology for pennies on the dollar once she's destroyed. The casual way she discussed destroying my life was more chilling than anything I'd heard before. There's more, Marcus said, fast-forwarding the recording. Listen to this part where she discusses your family's involvement. Jessica's voice continued. My parents have been planning this for over a year. We've done this before with my brother's construction company. The key is making the victim look mentally unstable while systematically destroying their credibility. I stared at Marcus in shock. They've done this before. That's what she said. According to Jessica, your family has a history of targeting successful family members and stealing their businesses using legal manipulation and psychological warfare. Marcus explained that he'd become suspicious when Jessica couldn't answer basic technical questions about the technology she was trying to sell. She had detailed written specifications but no understanding of how anything actually worked. That told me she was stealing information rather than legitimately representing your company. Why didn't you contact me directly? I tried, but Jessica claimed you were having mental health problems and weren't reliable for business communications. She said the family was protecting you by managing your affairs. I realized Jessica had been proactively preventing competitors from contacting me directly, ensuring I couldn't learn about her information-selling activities. Marcus, there's something else you should know. Jessica isn't working alone. Marcus introduced me to Sarah Kim, CEO of Innovate Tech, another Austin technology company. Sarah had been waiting at a nearby table and joined our conversation. Ms. Morrison Jessica approached my company 6 weeks ago with a similar offer, Sarah explained. She claimed to have inside access to Morrison Tech Solutions and wanted to sell us strategic information about your upcoming product releases. Did you buy information from her? No, because something felt wrong about the whole situation. Jessica seemed nervous and kept changing her story about how she'd obtained the information. So I contacted Marcus to see if he'd had similar experiences. Marcus and Sarah had been quietly investigating Jessica's activities for weeks, gathering evidence and trying to understand the scope of her information-selling operation. We realized Jessica was approaching multiple companies with stolen information, Marcus said. But we didn't understand this was part of a larger family conspiracy until our most recent meeting with her. Sarah pulled out her own recording device. Listen to what Jessica told me during our last conversation. Jessica's voice came through clearly. Once my parents and I control Morrison Tech Solutions completely, we can sell off the valuable parts to the highest bidders. Evelyn will be in prison or a mental institution, so she won't be able to interfere. The recorded evidence was devastating. Jessica had explicitly discussed plans to have me imprisoned or institutionalized while they dismantled my company and sold my technology to competitors. This is evidence of criminal conspiracy, I said. Exactly, Marcus replied, and we want to help you stop them. I looked at these two competitors who were offering to help me fight my own family. Why would you risk getting involved in this situation? Marcus's expression became serious. Because what your family is doing goes beyond business competition. They're destroying lives and corrupting entire industries. If they succeed with you, they'll target other entrepreneurs next. Sarah nodded in agreement. We've both built our companies from nothing just like you did. The idea that families could systematically destroy entrepreneurs using legal manipulation is terrifying for everyone in the business community. They explained that they'd been consulting with their attorneys about the best way to expose Jessica's activities without compromising their own companies. "We need your cooperation to make this work," Marcus said. "We have evidence of Jessica's attempts to sell stolen information, but we need your testimony to prove the information was obtained illegally. My family has destroyed my access to legal representation. I don't even have an attorney anymore." "Actually, you do," Sarah said with a smile. "Marcus and I have hired criminal attorney Catherine Wright specifically to represent you in this matter. She specializes in white-collar crime and has experience with complex family fraud cases." I felt tears of relief starting to form. After days of complete isolation, I suddenly had allies with resources and expertise. "Catherine Wright is meeting us here in 20 minutes, Marcus continued. "She's reviewed the evidence we've collected and believes we can build a strong case against your family." "But why would you pay for my legal representation?" "Because stopping your family protects the entire Austin business community," Sarah explained. "If they can steal your company using forged documents and false psychiatric reports, they can target any entrepreneur." As if on cue, a professional-looking woman in her 50s approached our table. Catherine Wright had silver hair, sharp eyes, and the confident bearing of someone who'd won difficult cases. "Ms. Morrison, I'm Catherine Wright. Marcus and Sarah have briefed me on your situation, and I believe we can not only stop your family's theft, but also bring criminal charges against everyone involved." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt hope returning. I wasn't fighting alone anymore. Catherine Wright outlined a strategy that began with documenting all the evidence Marcus and Sarah had collected, continued with investigation of the fraudulent documents my family had created, and concluded with coordinated law enforcement action against the entire conspiracy. "The key is moving fast and staying ahead of their timeline," Catherine explained. "Once they realize you have legal representation and evidence, they'll try to accelerate their plan or destroy incriminating materials." "Oh, what do you need from me?" "Everything you've discovered about the forged documents, fake psychiatric reports, stolen money, and fraudulent legal proceedings. We need to build a comprehensive case that exposes the full scope of their conspiracy." As we planned our counterattack, I realized my family had made a fatal error. They'd assumed their systematic destruction of my resources would leave me helpless and isolated. Instead, their cruelty had motivated my competitors to become my allies, and their overconfidence had led them to create evidence that would destroy them. The hunters were about to become the hunted. Saturday morning brought the first ray of hope I'd felt since discovering my family's betrayal. Catherine Wright had arranged to meet me at her law office downtown, where we could safely plan our counterattack without fear of surveillance or interference. Her office was in one of Austin's historic buildings on Congress Avenue, with high ceilings, polished hardwood floors, and the kind of substantial furniture that conveyed decades of legal experience. Unlike the intimidating corporate atmosphere of Peterson Hayes and Associates, this space felt like a sanctuary where justice was actually pursued rather than manipulated. "Ms. Morrison, before we begin, I need you to understand something important," Catherine said as she organized thick files on her conference table. "What your family has done isn't just theft or fraud. They've committed dozens of serious felonies that could send them to federal prison for decades." I settled into a leather chair, finally feeling like I had a competent advocate fighting for me rather than against me. "The evidence Marcus and Sarah have provided gives us unprecedented insight into a sophisticated criminal operation," Catherine continued. "But I suspect what we've discovered so far is only the beginning." She opened the first file, revealing transcripts of all the recorded conversations Jessica had with various companies trying to sell stolen information. Jessica approached 7 different Austin technology companies over the past 4 months trying to sell your proprietary information. She succeeded in selling data to 2 companies before Marcus and Sarah became suspicious. which companies bought stolen information. Data Tech Solutions paid her $15,000 for client lists and pricing strategies. Austin's software partners paid $22,000 for your upcoming product development plans. I realized the scope of Jessica's betrayal was even worse than I'd understood. She hadn't just been gathering information, she'd been actively selling my business secrets to fund their conspiracy. But here's where it gets interesting, Catherine said, opening a second file. The money Jessica received from selling your information didn't go into her personal accounts. It was transferred to the same shell companies your parents used to hide the stolen loan money. So the information sales were funding their legal and administrative costs? Exactly. Jessica was essentially selling your own intellectual property to finance the conspiracy to steal your company. Catherine showed me financial records Marcus and Sarah's investigators had uncovered. The pattern was clear. Money from information sales had been used to pay William Hayes for legal services, Dr. Franklin Reed for creating fake psychiatric reports, and several other professionals involved in the fraud. Dr. Franklin Reed actually exists, I asked. Oh yes, he exists, but he's not a psychiatrist. Franklin Reed is a former medical student who was expelled from UT Southwestern for falsifying patient records. He now runs a document forgery operation, specializing in medical and psychiatric reports. The revelation that there was an actual person behind the fake psychiatric evaluations was both reassuring and terrifying. It meant the reports could be traced and their creator prosecuted, but it also meant my family had connections to professional criminals. Franklin Reed has been providing fraudulent medical documentation for white-collar criminals for over 5 years, Catherine explained. He's created fake psychiatric reports, disability evaluations, and medical records for dozens of fraud schemes across Texas. How did my family find someone like that? That's what we need to determine. The level of criminal sophistication suggests this isn't their first time targeting family members. Catherine opened a third file containing information that made my blood run cold. Ms. Morrison, do you have an older brother named Nathan? Yes, but we haven't spoken in years. He had some kind of falling out with my parents and moved away. Nathan Morrison owned a successful construction company in Houston 5 years ago. Morrison Construction had over $2 million in annual revenue and employed 15 people. I stared at Catherine in confusion. Nathan never told us about having a construction company. According to public records, Nathan's company was destroyed through a series of legal maneuvers very similar to what your family attempted with your business. Forged documents, fake psychological evaluations, and fraudulent ownership transfers. The implication hit me like a physical blow. My parents stole Nathan's company. It appears so. Nathan lost everything and was left financially ruined with massive legal debts. The company assets were transferred to shell corporations controlled by your parents. Catherine showed me court documents from Nathan's unsuccessful attempts to fight the theft of his business. The legal strategies were identical to what my family had tried with my company fake psychiatric reports, claiming mental instability, forged authorization documents, and systematic destruction of his credibility. Nathan eventually gave up fighting and disappeared. He currently lives in a trailer park outside Las Vegas, working odd construction jobs and trying to rebuild his life. I realized my parents weren't just greedy opportunists, they were professional predators who targeted their own children for systematic financial destruction. We need to contact Nathan immediately, I said. His testimony could prove this is a pattern of criminal behavior. I've already located him. He's been waiting 5 years for someone to investigate what happened to his company. Catherine arranged a conference call with Nathan for that afternoon. When I heard my brother's voice for the first time in years, the pain and anger in his tone was unmistakable. Evelyn, I tried to warn you about them, but you wouldn't listen. You thought I was just bitter about some family disagreement. I remembered Nathan attempting to contact me several years ago, trying to explain something about our parents that I dismissed as paranoid accusations from someone who'd obviously made poor business decisions. Nathan, I'm so sorry. I had no idea what they'd done to you. They destroyed me completely, just like they're trying to destroy you. The fake psychiatric reports, the forged documents, the systematic isolation from professional help. It's exactly the same strategy. Nathan provided detailed information about his experience that perfectly paralleled mine. The fraudulent medical evaluations claiming mental instability, the corruption of legal representation, the systematic destruction of financial resources, and the elaborate psychological manipulation designed to make him doubt his own perceptions. The worst part was realizing the conspiracy included people I'd trusted for years, Nathan said. My accountant, my lawyer, even my girlfriend had been compromised or replaced with people working for them. Replaced. The woman I was dating turned out to be a private investigator hired by Robert to gather information about my business and personal life. Sound familiar? I thought about Thomas and realized my family had used the exact same strategy against both Nathan and me. They'd hired professional infiltrators to pose as romantic partners while systematically gathering intelligence. Nathan, are you willing to testify about what they did to your company? I've been waiting 5 years for this opportunity. I kept detailed records of everything, including audio recordings of Robert admitting they'd stolen my business. Catherine Wright's expression brightened considerably. Audio recordings? Robert bragged about destroying my company during a family gathering. He thought I was too broken to ever fight back, so he felt safe discussing their methods. The recordings Nathan had made would provide crucial evidence that my parents had committed these crimes before and would likely continue targeting family members until they were stopped. There's something else you need to know, Nathan said. Our parents aren't really our parents. What do you mean? I hired a private investigator after losing my company. Robert and Karen Morrison adopted both of us from different families when we were infants. Our biological parents were desperate teenagers who gave us up thinking we'd have better lives. The revelation that Robert and Karen weren't my biological parents explained the calculated coldness with which they'd been willing to destroy their children's lives. We weren't family to them. We were long-term investments they'd acquired and cultivated specifically for financial exploitation. They've been planning this since we were children, Nathan continued, encouraging our entrepreneurial interests, providing business advice and connections, and positioning themselves to benefit from our eventual success. I realized my entire childhood had been preparation for this theft. Every business lesson Robert had taught me, every entrepreneurial skill Karen had encouraged, every piece of advice about building companies had been designed to maximize the value of what they planned to steal. How many other children have they done this to? I don't know, but the private investigator found evidence suggesting there might be others. Robert and Karen have been involved in multiple adoption proceedings over the past 30 years. Catherine Wright was taking detailed notes, realizing this case was far more complex than a simple family fraud scheme. If we can prove they've systematically targeted multiple adopted children for financial exploitation, we're looking at federal charges for organized criminal enterprise, she said. The scope of my family's criminal activities was staggering. They weren't just thieves. They were professional predators who'd built their entire lifestyle around destroying the lives of people they'd raised specifically for exploitation. But now they faced an opponent they hadn't anticipated, their victims working together with competent legal representation and extensive evidence of their crimes. The counter-investigation was about to become a federal case that would destroy their criminal enterprise permanently. Sunday morning brought a development that would transform our investigation from a family fraud case into something far more sinister. Catherine Wright had arranged for forensic accountant Rachel Davis to join our team. And what Rachel discovered in her preliminary analysis of the offshore accounts would expose the true scope of Robert and Karen's criminal enterprise. Rachel Davis was a woman in her 40s with sharp analytical skills and the kind of meticulous attention to detail that made financial criminals nervous. She'd spent the weekend tracing the complex web of shell companies and overseas accounts Nathan had helped us identify. Ms. Morrison, Rachel said as she spread financial documents across Catherine's conference table, what your parents have been doing is far more sophisticated than simple family fraud. They're running a professional criminal organization that's been targeting victims for over a decade. I studied the charts and graphs Rachel had prepared, each one revealing another layer of systematic theft and financial manipulation. The offshore accounts your family used to hide your stolen money contain over $27 million from dozens of different sources, Rachel continued. Your company's funds represent only a small percentage of their total criminal proceeds. Catherine Wright leaned forward, clearly understanding the implications. How many victims are we talking about? Based on the account records, at least 43 different individuals or businesses have been systematically defrauded over the past 10 years. The average theft amount is $600,000, but some victims lost millions. Rachel showed us a spreadsheet documenting the various fraud schemes Robert and Karen had orchestrated. Family businesses in Texas, Arizona, Colorado, and New Mexico had all been targeted using variations of the same methods they'd tried with my company. The pattern is always similar, Rachel explained. They identify successful entrepreneurs with family connections, infiltrate their operations using fake relatives or romantic partners, then systematically drain assets using forged documents and legal manipulation. Or fake relatives. In several cases, Robert and Karen posed as distant cousins or family friends to gain access to successful businesses. They'd establish relationships over months or years, gradually gaining trust and access to sensitive information. I realized Thomas hadn't been their first use of romantic infiltration. They'd been deploying fake boyfriends and girlfriends against victims for years, perfecting the psychological manipulation techniques they'd use against Nathan and me. The most disturbing aspect, Rachel continued, is the evidence suggesting they specifically target adopted children they've raised for this purpose. She showed us adoption records spanning 3 decades, documenting at least 15 children Robert and Karen had adopted from desperate families across the southwestern United States. They seem to prefer adopting infants from teenage mothers in difficult financial situations. The biological parents are told the children will be raised by a successful, loving family and given opportunities they couldn't provide. And instead, the children are raised as future theft targets. Exactly. Robert and Karen encourage entrepreneurial development, provide business education and connections, then systematically steal everything their adopted children create once they achieve success. Catherine Wright was taking extensive notes, realizing the federal implications of what Rachel had discovered. If we can prove they've been using adoption services as a recruiting mechanism for fraud victims, we're looking at charges for child trafficking and organized criminal enterprise. Rachel opened another file containing the most shocking evidence yet. Several of the adopted children who were targeted for theft didn't survive the psychological destruction that followed. What do you mean? 3 former victims committed suicide after losing everything to Robert and Karen's schemes. 2 others suffered complete mental breakdowns and were institutionalized. The psychological warfare they use isn't just cruel, it's literally deadly. I felt physically sick thinking about other people who'd experienced what Nathan and I had gone through, but without the support network we'd managed to build. We also found evidence that some victims fought back and had to be eliminated through other means, Rachel said quietly. Eliminated. One former target, a successful restaurant owner in Phoenix, died in a suspicious car accident 2 weeks before he was scheduled to testify against them in court. Another victim, a software developer in Colorado, died from an apparent drug overdose despite having no history of substance abuse. The implication that Robert and Karen might have murdered people to protect their criminal enterprise added an entirely new level of horror to our situation. Are you saying they might have killed people? I'm saying the timing and circumstances of these deaths are statistically suspicious, Rachel replied carefully. Professional investigation would be needed to determine if criminal activity was involved. Catherine Wright was already making notes about contacting federal law enforcement. This is far beyond what local authorities can handle. We need FBI involvement immediately. There's more, Rachel said, opening her final file. The offshore accounts are connected to international money laundering operations involving organized crime syndicates in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. She showed us transaction records proving Robert and Karen's stolen money was being cleaned through legitimate businesses controlled by criminal organizations. They're not just stealing from individuals, they're feeding money into international criminal networks that use those funds for drug trafficking, human trafficking, and weapons smuggling. I realized my parents weren't just family predators. They were contributing to some of the most serious criminal activities in the world by providing clean money to organized crime syndicates. But the good news, Rachel continued, is that their connection to international criminal networks makes them a high priority for federal law enforcement. The FBI has been tracking these money laundering operations for years. Catherine Wright immediately called FBI Special Agent Jennifer Hayes, who specialized in complex financial crimes and international money laundering cases. Agent Hayes, this is Catherine Wright. I need to report a major discovery related to your ongoing investigation of offshore money laundering through Cayman Islands shell companies. The conversation that followed would change everything. Agent Hayes had been investigating the exact same international criminal networks that Robert and Karen were using to clean their stolen money. Agent Hayes is coming to Austin tomorrow morning, Catherine said after ending the call. The FBI has been trying to identify the domestic sources feeding money into these international operations for over 18 months. They've been investigating my parents. Not specifically, but they've been tracking the money laundering networks your parents have been using. Our evidence provides the missing pieces they need to prosecute the entire operation. Rachel explained that federal investigators had been monitoring suspicious overseas transfers, but couldn't identify the original sources of the money being laundered. Your parents and their criminal organization represent the domestic end of an international pipeline that the FBI has been trying to shut down for years, she said. What happens now? Now we become federal witnesses in a case that's been building for over a year, Catherine replied. The evidence we've assembled will help the FBI prosecute not just your parents, but an entire international criminal network. Agent Hayes would arrive Monday morning with federal resources that would transform our local fraud case into a major international criminal investigation. But first, we needed to make sure Robert and Karen didn't realize federal authorities were closing in on their operation. Until the FBI takes control of this investigation, we need to maintain absolute secrecy, Catherine warned. If your parents suspect federal involvement, they might flee the country or destroy evidence. What about Jessica? She's still working at my company and has access to sensitive information. We'll coordinate with the FBI to monitor her activities without alerting her to our investigation. The key is allowing them to continue operating normally while we gather additional evidence. That afternoon, Catherine arranged a secure conference call with Nathan to brief him on the federal developments. Nathan, this investigation is now much bigger than what they did to your company or Evelyn's business. The FBI believes your parents are part of an international criminal organization. I'm not surprised, Nathan replied. The level of sophistication always seemed beyond what two people could manage alone. They had to have professional criminal assistance. Are you prepared to testify in federal court about what they did to you? I've been waiting 5 years for this opportunity. I have detailed documentation of everything they stole and every lie they told. The federal investigation would finally provide the resources necessary to expose Robert and Karen's complete criminal enterprise and bring justice for all their victims. But we still face the immediate challenge of preventing them from destroying evidence or fleeing the country once they realized the FBI was investigating their activities. Tomorrow's meeting with Agent Hayes would determine our strategy for capturing them before they could escape justice. Monday morning brought FBI Special Agent Jennifer Hayes to Catherine Wright's law office, along with a level of federal resources I'd never imagined would be involved in what had started as a family dispute. Agent Hayes was a sharp-eyed woman in her early 50s with the confident bearing of someone who'd spent decades tracking sophisticated criminals. Ms. Morrison, Agent Hayes said as she settled into Catherine's conference room, your family's criminal organization has been on our radar for 18 months, but we couldn't identify the domestic sources of the money laundering operation until now. She opened a briefcase containing thick files and electronic devices that looked like something from a spy movie. The offshore accounts your parents have been using are connected to criminal syndicates the Bureau has been investigating as part of Operation Clean Sweep, our largest financial crimes investigation in over a decade. Catherine Wright leaned forward, clearly understanding the significance. How does this change our approach to stopping them? It changes everything, Agent Hayes replied. This is now a federal case involving organized crime, international money laundering, and conspiracy charges that could send your parents to federal prison for life. She showed us surveillance photos of Robert and Karen meeting with people I'd never seen before in expensive restaurants and private clubs around Austin. Your parents have been meeting regularly with William Chen, a money laundering coordinator who works for international criminal syndicates. Chen specializes in cleaning stolen money through legitimate business investments. So the money they stole from me and Nathan is being used to fund other criminal activities? Exactly. Drug trafficking, human trafficking, weapons, smuggling. All of these operations require clean money to purchase legitimate businesses and properties. Your parents provide that clean money. Agent Hayes explained that the FBI had been monitoring William Chen's activities but couldn't identify his domestic partners until Rachel Davis's financial analysis connected Robert and Karen to the offshore accounts. We need your cooperation to complete our investigation and capture the entire network, Agent Hayes said, but this will require careful coordination to avoid alerting them to federal involvement. She outlined a strategy that would use our ongoing investigation as cover for federal surveillance while building additional evidence against the complete criminal organization. The key is allowing them to continue their normal activities while we document their crimes and identify all participants in the conspiracy. What about Jessica? She's still stealing information from my company and meeting with competitors. Jessica's activities are actually helping our investigation. We've been monitoring her meetings with various Austin technology companies, and she's inadvertently leading us to other criminal contacts. Agent Hayes showed us surveillance footage of Jessica meeting with people who weren't technology executives, but appeared to be coordinating criminal activities. 2 weeks ago, Jessica met with Elena Rodriguez, a document forger who specializes in corporate fraud. Last week, she had dinner with Michael Foster, a private investigator who provides illegal surveillance services to criminal organizations. I realized the scope of the conspiracy was far beyond anything I'd imagined. My family wasn't just working with a few corrupt professionals, they were part of an extensive criminal network. How long has this organization been operating? Based on our investigation, at least 15 years. Your parents started small, targeting individual family members and friends, but their success attracted attention from organized crime syndicates looking for legitimate ways to clean stolen money. Agent Hayes explained that Robert and Karen had essentially franchised their family fraud techniques to larger criminal organizations, providing training and consultation services to help other criminals steal from their victims more effectively. They've become consultants for family-based financial crimes. Criminal organizations across the Southwest have been using their methods to target successful business owners. So other people are experiencing what Nathan and I went through. Unfortunately, yes, we've identified at least 12 other active cases where their techniques are being used against victims in Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado. Catherine Wright was taking extensive notes, realizing the federal case was far more complex than our local fraud situation. What do you need from us to build the federal case? We need you to continue your normal activities while wearing federal surveillance equipment. Every conversation with your family members will provide additional evidence for prosecution. Agent Hayes showed us sophisticated recording devices that look like normal jewelry and clothing accessories. These devices will allow us to monitor and record all interactions with your parents, Jessica Thomas, and any other conspirators. The recordings will provide direct evidence of their criminal plans. Is it safe for me to continue interacting with them if they suspect I'm working with law enforcement? We'll have constant surveillance protection. If there's any indication of danger, we'll intervene immediately. The plan Agent Hayes outlined was both thrilling and terrifying. I would continue pretending to be the helpless victim while secretly gathering federal evidence against my family's entire criminal organization. What about Thomas? He's still living in my apartment and expects me to trust him completely. Thomas Bradley, whose real name is Thomas Chen, William Chen's nephew, will be one of our primary targets. His infiltration of your personal life provides evidence of the organization's sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques. Learning that Thomas was actually related to the international money laundering coordinator made our fake relationship even more disturbing. I hadn't just been deceived by a hired investigator. I'd been manipulated by someone with direct family connections to organized crime. We need you to maintain the relationship with Thomas while gathering information about his criminal activities and family connections. Agent Hayes continued. How do I do that without arousing suspicion? Oh, I act like the confused, overwhelmed victim they expect you to be. Ask questions that seem to come from emotional distress rather than criminal investigation. Agent Hayes provided specific guidelines for conversations that would elicit incriminating responses from Thomas and my family members. The goal is making them feel so confident in their success that they become careless about discussing their criminal activities openly. When will you arrest them? We need to coordinate arrests across multiple states to capture the entire network simultaneously. That requires several more weeks of evidence gathering and surveillance. She explained that premature arrests would allow other members of the criminal organization to destroy evidence and flee prosecution. We get one chance to take down this entire operation. If we move too early, we might catch your parents, but miss the larger criminal network they're connected to. Catherine Wright asked about protection for other potential victims who might be targeted while the investigation continued. We're monitoring all known targets and will intervene if anyone faces immediate danger, but allowing the organization to continue operating normally is essential for gathering complete evidence. That afternoon, Agent Hayes arranged for me to be fitted with federal surveillance equipment that would record every interaction with my family members. Remember, your safety is our highest priority, she said as technicians tested the recording devices. If you feel threatened or uncomfortable at any point, use the emergency signal we've provided. The emergency signal was a specific phrase I could work into any conversation that would alert federal agents to intervene immediately. Starting tomorrow, you'll resume normal contact with your family while gathering evidence for the federal case. Every lie they tell, every crime they discuss, every threat they make will be recorded and used against them in court. As I prepared to return to my apartment where Thomas was waiting with fake concern and hidden recording equipment, I realized the psychological challenge ahead would be enormous. I had to pretend to love someone I now knew was a professional criminal while secretly gathering evidence that would send him to federal prison. But for the first time since discovering the conspiracy, I felt truly confident about the outcome. The FBI's resources and expertise would ensure that justice was served not just for Nathan and me, but for dozens of other victims whose lives had been destroyed by my family's criminal enterprise. The hunters were about to discover they'd become the hunted. Tuesday evening marked the beginning of the most psychologically challenging phase of my entire ordeal. Wearing federal recording equipment while pretending to be the helpless victim Thomas and my family expected required acting skills I'd never known I possessed. I returned to my apartment to find Thomas waiting with takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant and an expression of concerned sympathy that I now knew was completely fabricated. As he hugged me hello, I felt the small recording device hidden in my necklace capturing every word of our conversation. "Sweetheart, how are you holding up?" Thomas asked with perfectly fake sincerity. "I've been so worried about you with all this stress from the family situation." "I don't know what to do anymore," I replied, following Agent Hayes' guidance to appear confused and overwhelmed. "Everything is falling apart, and I feel like I'm losing my mind." Thomas guided me to the couch with gentle touches that made my skin crawl now that I understood his true identity. "You've been under tremendous pressure. Maybe you should consider taking some time away from all this conflict." "Taking time away from what?" "From trying to fight your family's decisions about the company. Sometimes accepting difficult situations is healthier than continuing to struggle against them." I realized Thomas was encouraging me to surrender, which would make the final theft of my company easier for everyone involved. "But it feels so unfair. I built that company from nothing." "I know, honey, but holding on to anger and resentment will only hurt you more. Your family believes they're acting in everyone's best interests." The casual way he dismissed years of my hard work while pretending to comfort me was more disgusting than anything I'd experienced yet. "Thomas, do you really think Jessica deserves to control my company more than I do?" "Well, Jessica has been learning the business and demonstrating real leadership potential. Maybe this transition will allow you to pursue other interests without the stress of running a company." I forced myself to appear defeated rather than outraged. "Maybe you're right. I'm just so tired of fighting." "That's completely understandable. Fighting against family is emotionally exhausting." Thomas seemed pleased with my apparent resignation, and I could see him relaxing as he believed his psychological manipulation was succeeding. Over the next hour, I gradually drew him into discussions about my family's plans, asking questions that seemed to come from emotional distress rather than criminal investigation. "Do you think my parents will let me stay involved with the company at all?" "I think they want what's best for you, which might mean stepping away entirely to focus on your mental health." "Mental health? Evelyn, you've been under enormous stress and it's affected your judgment. Taking time to work through these psychological challenges might be exactly what you need." I realized Thomas was reinforcing the false narrative about my mental instability, preparing me to accept psychiatric treatment that would further undermine my credibility. "Have you talked to my parents about my mental health concerns? We've all been worried about you. Your father mentioned that Dr. Reed thinks you might benefit from more intensive treatment." "What kind of intensive treatment?" Thomas hesitated, clearly realizing he might be saying too much. "Just professional help to work through the stress and anxiety you've been experiencing." "Thomas, are you saying my family thinks I need to be hospitalized?" "Not hospitalized exactly, but maybe a residential program where you can get the support you need without the pressures of daily life." I understood now that their plan included having me institutionalized, which would remove me as a threat while they completed their theft of everything I owned. Would you support that decision? Honey, I love you and I want whatever helps you feel better. If professional treatment is what you need, then yes, I would support that. The recording device captured Thomas explicitly supporting plans to have me committed to a psychiatric facility based on fraudulent evaluations. That night, I called Catherine Wright from my office bathroom with the water running to mask our conversation. Catherine, Thomas just admitted they're planning to have me institutionalized. This is moving faster than we anticipated. The FBI is monitoring the situation closely. Agent Hayes wants to accelerate our timeline before they can take any action against you. What does that mean? We're going to stage your apparent suicide. The plan Catherine outlined was both brilliant and terrifying. Federal agents would help me fake my death by suicide, causing the conspirators to believe they'd won completely and accelerating their activities in ways that would expose them to federal surveillance. If they think you're dead, they'll move quickly to liquidate your assets and transfer money offshore. That acceleration will create opportunities for mistakes and provide evidence of their international criminal connections. How do we fake my suicide convincingly? The FBI has extensive experience with witness protection scenarios that include staged deaths. Agent Hayes will coordinate everything to ensure your safety while creating believable evidence for your family. Wednesday afternoon, Agent Hayes met me at a secure federal facility outside Austin to plan the staged suicide operation. Ms. Morrison, this will require precise timing and coordination. Your family must believe you've died by suicide while federal agents document their reaction and subsequent criminal activities. She explained that they would stage my apparent death by drowning at Lake Travis, a location known for tragic accidents and suicides. We'll leave your car near the water with a suicide note expressing despair about losing everything to family betrayal. Your clothing and personal items will be found near the shoreline. What about my body? We'll stage evidence suggesting drowning, but recovery efforts will be unsuccessful due to strong currents and deep water. It's not uncommon for bodies to never be recovered from Lake Travis. The psychological profile Agent Hayes described for my fake suicide was carefully designed to be believable to my family. The note will express feelings of betrayal, hopelessness, and inability to fight anymore. It will specifically mention losing faith in family and feeling that death is preferable to poverty and disgrace. Won't they be suspicious about the timing? Actually, the timing makes it more believable. They've been systematically destroying your life, and suicide would seem like a logical result of their psychological warfare. Agent Hayes showed me the suicide note federal forensic experts had prepared using samples of my handwriting and psychological language patterns that would convince any investigation. The note will be found in your apartment while your car and personal items will be discovered at Lake Travis. The combination provides compelling evidence of planned suicide. That evening, I had dinner with Thomas for what I knew would be the last time trying to plant subtle hints that would support the suicide scenario without making him suspicious. I keep thinking about how different my life was just a week ago, I said sadly. Everything I worked for is gone, and I don't see how to rebuild from this. You're stronger than you realize, Evelyn. You'll find a way through this difficult time. I don't feel strong anymore. I feel like everything I believed about family and trust was wrong. Thomas seemed to be studying my expression, possibly wondering if I was becoming suicidal. Are you having thoughts about hurting yourself? Sometimes I wonder if everyone would be better off without me causing family conflict. Evelyn, don't say things like that. Your family loves you and wants you to be healthy and happy. The irony of receiving fake concern about suicide from someone planning to have me institutionalized was almost too much to bear. Thursday morning, Agent Hayes and her team would stage my apparent death while federal surveillance equipment captured my family's real reactions to believing they'd driven me to suicide. By Thursday night, Robert, Karen, Jessica, and Thomas would think they'd won completely, and their celebration would provide the final evidence needed to destroy their criminal organization forever. The psychological warfare they'd use against Nathan, me, and dozens of other victims was about to be turned against them with federal precision and devastating effectiveness. Thursday morning arrived gray and misty, perfect weather for the elaborate deception Agent Hayes and her team had orchestrated at Lake Travis. As federal agents positioned surveillance equipment and prepared evidence for my staged suicide, I sat in a safe house 30 miles away, watching on monitors as the operation that would destroy my family's criminal empire unfolded. Agent Hayes had assembled a team of specialists who created crime scene evidence so convincing that even experienced investigators would believe I drowned myself in despair over losing everything to family betrayal. "The suicide note is in your apartment," Agent Hayes reported through secure communications. "Your car has been positioned at the lake, overlook with the driver's door open purse on the passenger seat and shoes near the water's edge." Federal surveillance teams were strategically positioned to monitor my family's reactions when they learned about my apparent death. Hidden cameras and recording equipment would capture their immediate responses and subsequent criminal activities. Remember, once they believe you're dead, they'll accelerate their timeline dramatically. We expect significant criminal activity within hours of the discovery. The first phase of the operation succeeded perfectly. At 9:15 Thursday morning, Thomas discovered my suicide note while searching for me in our apartment after I'd failed to return home Wednesday night. Through surveillance cameras, federal agents watched Thomas read the note immediately, call my parents, and then contact Jessica with urgent instructions about securing company assets. "The note is working exactly as intended," Agent Hayes reported. "Thomas is clearly relieved rather than grief-stricken, which indicates he knew the psychological pressure was designed to drive you to suicide." Within 30 minutes, Robert and Karen arrived at Lake Travis, where local authorities were staging the discovery of my abandoned car and personal items. Federal agents recorded their conversation as they discussed my apparent death. "She was weaker than we anticipated," Robert said, examining my shoes near the water's edge. "Most targets struggle longer before giving up completely." "At least this resolves the situation cleanly," Karen replied. "No lengthy legal battles or problematic investigations." Their casual discussion of my supposed suicide as a convenient business solution provided chilling evidence of their complete lack of human compassion. But the most incriminating moment came when Jessica arrived at the lake and immediately began coordinating with Thomas about accelerating their asset seizure timeline. "We need to liquidate everything before any probate court gets involved," Jessica said, apparently unconcerned about my death, except as it affected their theft schedule. "William Chen is expecting the final transfer by tomorrow afternoon," Thomas replied. "If we move fast, everything can be offshore before anyone asks questions about estate procedures." Federal surveillance captured explicit discussion of international money laundering plans that would provide crucial evidence for prosecuting the entire criminal network. By Thursday afternoon, the conspiracy members were moving so quickly to steal and hide my assets that they became careless about security procedures they'd previously followed carefully. "They're making exactly the mistakes we hoped for," Agent Hayes explained as we watched surveillance footage. "Accelerated timelines create opportunities for evidence gathering that normal operations wouldn't provide." Robert and Karen met with William Chen at an expensive Austin restaurant discussing plans to transfer my company's assets to offshore accounts controlled by international criminal syndicates. Federal agents recorded detailed conversations about money laundering procedures, criminal contacts, and plans for future fraud operations. "The Cayman Islands accounts are ready for immediate transfer," William Chen said. "Once the Austin assets are liquefied, we can have everything offshore within 48 hours. What about the other targets we discussed? Robert asked. Babe, Phoenix and Denver operations are proceeding on schedule. The family infiltration techniques you developed are working perfectly with those targets. The recorded conversation provided evidence that Robert and Karen's criminal organization was actively targeting victims in multiple states using the same methods they'd used against Nathan and me. Meanwhile, Jessica was systematically stealing everything valuable from my company, downloading client databases, financial records, and proprietary software code that she planned to sell to competitors. She's essentially looting the company, Agent Hayes observed as we watched surveillance footage of Jessica filling boxes with hard drives and documentation. Every theft is being recorded for federal prosecution. But the operation hit a critical snag Thursday evening when Jessica apparently became suspicious about the timing of my suicide and began questioning whether my death was genuine. "Something doesn't feel right about this," Jessica told Thomas during a phone conversation federal agents recorded. Evelyn was fighting back too hard to suddenly give up and kill herself. "People under psychological pressure can break suddenly," Thomas replied. "The suicide note seemed authentic." "Maybe, but I think we should verify she's actually dead before moving all the money." Agent Hayes immediately recognized the danger. If Jessica becomes suspicious enough to investigate, she might discover the staged evidence and alert the entire network. "What do we do?" "We accelerate to full arrest mode immediately. We have enough evidence to prosecute everyone involved, and we can't risk them discovering the deception." That evening, Agent Hayes coordinated with FBI field offices in Phoenix, Denver, and Las Vegas to prepare simultaneous arrests across 4 states. The operation would capture not just my family, but the entire criminal network they'd been working with for over a decade. "The arrests will begin at 6 a.m. Friday morning," Agent Hayes explained. "Teams in Texas, Arizona, Colorado, and Nevada will take into custody 47 individuals involved in this criminal enterprise." "What about the international money laundering connections?" "Interpol is coordinating with authorities in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland to freeze accounts and arrest foreign operatives simultaneously." As federal agents prepared for what would be one of the largest financial crime arrests in recent Texas history, I finally allowed myself to feel genuine hope about the outcome. But Thursday night brought one final crisis that threatened to destroy everything we'd accomplished. Jessica had become suspicious enough about my supposed death that she'd hired a private investigator to verify my suicide. If that investigation discovered the staged evidence before Friday morning's arrests, the entire criminal network would have time to flee and destroy evidence. "We're monitoring Jessica's investigator," Agent Hayes assured me. "If he gets too close to discovering the truth, we'll arrest Jessica immediately to prevent her from alerting the others." Friday morning would determine whether months of federal investigation and elaborate deception would successfully destroy my family's criminal empire, or whether their last-minute suspicions would allow them to escape justice. Everything depended on 12 hours of careful surveillance and precise timing of the largest coordinated arrest operation in recent FBI history. Friday morning at 5:30 a.m., I stood in the FBI command center watching multiple screens showing surveillance footage from locations across 4 states where federal agents were preparing to arrest my family's entire criminal network. After months of psychological warfare, systematic theft, and elaborate deception, justice was finally within reach. "All teams report ready for coordinated arrests," Agent Hayes announced through secure communications. "Operation Clean Sweep begins in 30 minutes. But at 5:45 a.m., everything went wrong. "Agent Hayes, we have a problem," came a voice from the surveillance team monitoring Jessica's activities. "Target Jessica Morrison is not at her apartment. Her neighbors report seeing her leave with multiple suitcases around midnight." My heart sank as I realized Jessica had fled during the night, possibly taking crucial evidence that could destroy other victims or expose federal investigative methods. Do we have any indication of her destination? Negative. Her phone is turned off, credit cards unused since yesterday, and her car is missing from the apartment complex. Agent Hayes immediately contacted airport security and border patrol agencies to watch for Jessica attempting to flee the country. If she reaches international waters or a non-extradition country with sensitive information, she could expose our entire investigation and help other criminals escape prosecution. What sensitive information could she have? Client lists from other victims, details about federal surveillance methods, and financial records that could identify additional targets. If she sells that information to criminal organizations, innocent people could be murdered. The coordinated arrests proceeded as scheduled across Texas, Arizona, Colorado, and Nevada. Federal agents simultaneously arrested Robert Karen Thomas William Chen, Dr. Franklin Reed, and 39 other members of their criminal network. But Jessica's escape cast a shadow over what should have been a moment of complete victory. Oh, we got everyone except the person who knows the most about the organization's operations, Agent Hayes said grimly. Jessica has been the operational coordinator for years, and she knows details about victims and criminal contacts that no one else possesses. Around noon, airport security at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport spotted someone matching Jessica's description attempting to board a flight to the Cayman Islands using false identification documents. We need someone who can identify her positively and convince her to surrender without creating an international incident, Agent Hayes said. If she reaches the Cayman Islands with false documents, extradition becomes extremely complicated. I'll go, I said immediately. She won't expect me to be alive and the shock might make her cooperate. Agent Hayes hesitated. Ms. Morrison, this isn't standard procedure. Confronting her could be dangerous if she becomes desperate. She's my sister, and I know her psychological triggers better than anyone. If anyone can convince her to surrender, it's me. 2 hours later, I was on a federal aircraft flying to Dallas with agents who would provide backup support during what could be my final confrontation with Jessica. The flight gave me time to process everything that had happened since discovering my family's betrayal. In just 2 weeks, I'd learned that my entire life had been a carefully orchestrated fraud designed to position me for systematic theft. But I'd also discovered my own strength, found allies among competitors, and helped expose a criminal organization that had destroyed dozens of lives over more than a decade. Now, Jessica represented the final piece of this nightmare puzzle, and stopping her would determine whether complete justice could be achieved. At Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, federal agents had quietly surrounded the international terminal without alerting Jessica to their presence. She was apparently waiting for a delayed flight to the Cayman Islands, unaware that authorities had been monitoring her location. She's in the International Departure Lounge, Gate C-24, Agent Hayes reported through my earpiece. Approach carefully and try to get her talking before she realizes federal agents are involved. I walked through the airport with my heart pounding, knowing this conversation would determine the final outcome of everything we'd fought for. Jessica was sitting alone near the departure gate, looking nervous and constantly checking her watch. She wore a red baseball cap pulled low over her face and sunglasses, despite being indoors, obviously attempting to avoid recognition. Going somewhere interesting, I said, sitting down beside her. Jessica's reaction was everything I'd hoped for. Her face went completely white, her mouth fell open, and she dropped the boarding pass she'd been clutching. Evelyn, but how are you? Alive, disappointed. Jessica looked around frantically, clearly wondering if this was some kind of trap or hallucination. The suicide was staged, I continued calmly. Federal agents have been investigating you and our parents for months. Everyone else has been arrested, and now you're the last piece of their criminal organization. I don't know what you're talking about. Jessica, it's over. Robert Karen Thomas William Chen, Dr. Reed, they're all in federal custody. The offshore accounts have been frozen, the money laundering operation has been shut down, and dozens of other victims are finally getting justice. Jessica's hand moved toward her purse, and I wondered if she was carrying some kind of weapon. "Don't make this worse than it already is," I said firmly. "Surrender now, cooperate with federal authorities, and maybe you can get reduced charges. Run away and you'll spend the rest of your life as a fugitive." "They'll kill me if I surrender," Jessica whispered. "You don't understand how deep this goes." The international criminal contacts, the FBI, has been monitoring those operations for years. You'll be safer in federal custody than you would be hiding in the Cayman Islands. Jessica was clearly struggling with her options, realizing that both surrender and escape carried serious risks. "Evelyn, there's something you need to know about our family that the FBI probably hasn't told you." "What are you talking about?" "Robert and Karen aren't just professional criminals. They're part of a child trafficking operation that's been stealing and selling children for over 30 years. The revelation hit me like physical blow. Selling children. The adoptions were covers for child trafficking. We weren't adopted legally. We were purchased from desperate families and trafficked to people who trained us for financial exploitation. Jessica's words explained the calculated coldness with which Robert and Karen had been willing to destroy their children's lives. We hadn't been adopted. We'd been bought and trained like livestock for eventual slaughter. How many children have they trafficked? Over 60 children in the past 3 decades. Some were trained for financial crimes like us, but others were sold to people who wanted them for worse purposes. The scope of Robert and Karen's criminal activities was far beyond anything the FBI had suspected. They weren't just running financial fraud schemes, they were operating one of the largest child trafficking enterprises in the southwestern United States. "Jessica, this information can help the FBI save children who might still be in danger, but only if you cooperate fully with their investigation." I could see her resolve weakening as she considered the implications of what she'd revealed. "If I surrender, will you help make sure the FBI understands I was a victim too? I was trafficked as an infant and trained for this from childhood. I'll do everything I can to help you, but only if you surrender immediately and provide complete cooperation." Jessica looked toward the departure gate where her flight was beginning to board, then back at me with tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, Evelyn. I never wanted to hurt you, but they convinced me it was necessary for survival." "I know, and now you have a chance to help save other children from experiencing what we went through." Jessica slowly reached into her purse and pulled out several computer drives containing evidence about the child trafficking operation. "These have records of all the children they've trafficked over the years. Names, locations, buyers, everything needed to find survivors and prosecute the people who purchased them." As federal agents approached to take Jessica into custody, she handed me the computer drives that would help the FBI save dozens of children and prosecute one of the largest trafficking rings in American history. "Thank you for giving me the chance to do something right," Jessica said as agents led her away. The final confrontation was over, but the information Jessica had provided would launch investigations that could save lives and bring justice to victims I'd never known existed. My family's betrayal had uncovered something far more sinister than financial fraud, but it had also provided the key to stopping crimes that were truly monstrous. 6 months after that confrontation at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, I stood in my restored company's conference room looking out at downtown Austin through floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the morning sun. The view was the same as it had been before my family's betrayal, but everything else in my life had been transformed in ways I could never have imagined. Morrison Tech Solutions had not only survived my family's attempted theft, but had grown into a $12 million enterprise with 47 employees and contracts spanning 3 states. The company that had nearly been destroyed by fraud was now helping other businesses protect themselves against exactly the kinds of criminal schemes my family had perpetrated. The federal prosecution of my family's criminal organization had resulted in sentences that reflected the true scope of their crimes. Robert received 25 years in federal prison for child trafficking money, laundering, fraud, and conspiracy. Karen received 22 years for the same charges. Both would likely spend the rest of their lives in prison. Thomas Bradley, whose real name was Thomas Chen, received 15 years for fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. William Chen, the international money laundering coordinator, received 18 years in deportation back to Hong Kong after completing his sentence. Dr. Franklin Reed, the document forger who'd created fraudulent psychiatric reports for dozens of criminal schemes, received 12 years for medical fraud and conspiracy. But the most significant outcome was Jessica's cooperation with federal authorities in exposing the child trafficking operation Robert and Karen had been running for over 30 years. Jessica received a reduced sentence of 3 years in minimum security federal prison in exchange for providing complete testimony about the trafficking network. Her cooperation led to the rescue of 19 children who were still being held by trafficking rings and the arrest of over 200 people involved in purchasing or facilitating child trafficking operations. Nathan had relocated to Austin, where I helped him rebuild his life and start a new construction company specializing in security systems for small businesses. Working together, we developed protocols that helped entrepreneurs protect themselves against family-based fraud schemes. Family predators rely on trust and emotional manipulation, Nathan explained during his presentations at business conferences. But there are legal and financial safeguards that can prevent relatives from destroying what you've built. The Victim Recovery Fund I'd established with Marcus Thompson and Sarah Kim had helped 34 other families recover assets stolen through schemes similar to what Robert and Karen had attempted. We'd also worked with federal authorities to identify additional victims and provide them with resources for rebuilding their lives. Marcus and Sarah had become genuine friends and business partners. Our 3 companies now collaborated on projects that none of us could have handled independently, creating a business alliance built on mutual respect and shared values. Competition doesn't have to mean destruction, Sarah often said during our joint business presentations. Ethical competitors can become powerful allies when they face common threats. But the most meaningful relationship that had developed from this nightmare was with Anthony Walker, the private investigator who'd helped Catherine Wright build the case against my family. Anthony's intelligence, integrity, and genuine concern for justice had impressed me during the investigation, and our professional relationship had gradually evolved into something much more personal. Unlike my relationship with Thomas, which had been based on deception and manipulation, my connection with Anthony was built on complete honesty and mutual respect. He'd seen me at my most vulnerable and desperate, but he'd also witnessed my strength and determination to fight for justice. Trust is something you build through actions, not words, Anthony often said. Anyone can claim to love you, but real love is demonstrated through consistent support and honest communication. Our relationship had developed slowly and carefully with both of us, understanding that rebuilding the ability to trust required patience and transparency. The legal proceedings had also led to broader reforms in how family-based fraud cases were investigated and prosecuted. Catherine Wright had worked with federal legislators to strengthen laws against the use of fraudulent psychiatric evaluations in civil proceedings, and to improve protections for entrepreneurs against family-based theft. The Morrison case demonstrated that family relationships can be used as weapons by sophisticated criminals. Catherine explained during congressional testimony, "We need legal frameworks that protect successful individuals from relatives who view them as financial resources rather than family members." The psychological healing had been more complex than the legal resolution. Learning that Robert and Karen had trafficked me as an infant and trained me for eventual financial exploitation had required extensive therapy to process and understand. You survived not just theft, but systematic psychological abuse designed to make you question your own perceptions and abilities. My therapist, Dr. Lisa Martinez, explained. The fact that you fought back and prevailed demonstrates remarkable psychological strength. The therapy had helped me understand that the love and family connection I'd felt growing up had been genuine from my perspective, even though it had been calculated manipulation from Robert and Karen's perspective. Your capacity for love and trust isn't damaged by their betrayal, Dr. Martinez assured me. It's actually a strength that helped you build the alliances necessary to stop them. One of the most meaningful developments had been reconnecting with my biological family. Federal investigators had located my birth mother, Maria Santos, a woman who'd given me up for adoption at 17, because she couldn't provide the opportunities she wanted me to have. I thought I was giving you a chance at a better life, Maria said when we met for the first time since my infancy. I never imagined you'd be sold to people who would abuse you. Maria had been devastated to learn that the loving family she'd entrusted with her daughter had actually been child traffickers who'd purchased me for eventual financial exploitation. But you survived, and you've built something beautiful with your life, Maria said with tears in her eyes. You've become exactly the kind of strong, successful woman I hoped you'd grow up to be. Building a relationship with my biological mother along with her extended family had provided me with genuine family connections based on mutual affection rather than financial calculation. The company's success had also created opportunities to help other entrepreneurs avoid the kind of betrayal I'd experienced. Morrison Tech Solutions now provided security consulting services specifically designed to protect family businesses from internal fraud and manipulation. Family-based businesses are particularly vulnerable to sophisticated theft because they rely on trust rather than formal security protocols, I explained during industry presentations, but there are proven methods for maintaining family relationships while protecting business assets. As I prepared for another day of meetings with clients who needed protection against relatives plotting to steal their life's work, I reflected on the lessons I'd learned from surviving my family's betrayal. The most important realization was that true family consists of people who choose to love and support each other, rather than those connected by genetics or legal documents. Marcus, Sarah, Anthony, Nathan, Catherine, and even Agent Hayes had demonstrated more genuine family loyalty than the people who'd raised me. Blood relationships don't guarantee love, and love doesn't require blood relationships. I learned to tell other victims of family betrayal, you have the right to choose family members who deserve your trust and affection. The second crucial lesson was that success means nothing without trustworthy people to share it with. Building wealth and achieving professional recognition are hollow accomplishments if they're not grounded in authentic relationships with people who genuinely care about your well-being. Money and business success can be stolen, but relationships built on honesty and mutual respect are unbreakable. I often reminded myself during difficult moments. Finally, I'd learned that the greatest victory isn't financial recovery, but emotional freedom. The ability to trust again, to love again, and to build new relationships without being paralyzed by past betrayals. As I looked out at the Austin skyline, thinking about the businesses I was helping protect and the lives that had been saved through exposing the trafficking operation, I realized my family's betrayal had ultimately led to outcomes far more meaningful than anything I could have achieved if they'd never tried to destroy me. The pain had been genuine and devastating, but it had also revealed strength I didn't know I possessed and connected me with people who became my true family. Before I finish my story, I want to ask you something that's been on my mind. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted completely was actually working against you? How did you find the strength to rebuild your ability to trust other people? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below because I think sharing these stories helps all of us recognize that we're not alone in facing betrayal and that recovery is possible. If my story has resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to hear more about how ordinary people survive extraordinary betrayals. And if you know someone who might benefit from hearing that family abuse can be survived and justice can be achieved, please share this story with them. Thank you for listening to the most difficult and ultimately most transformative experience of my life. I hope my journey from victim to survivor to advocate inspires you to never give up fighting for justice, no matter how powerful the people working against you might seem. Remember, you are stronger than you know. You deserve relationships based on genuine love and respect, and you have the right to protect what you've built from anyone who would try to destroy it, even if those people are family. Stay strong, trust wisely, and never let anyone convince you that their betrayal is somehow for your own good.